meeting. We'll open the meeting. Call for any apologies. There are no notification of any apologies. Confirmation of the order of business. There's no change to the order of business. Just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded for live streaming and on Council's YouTube channel. Move to item 3, interests. Any updates to the interest register or any conflicts to be identified in relation to any topics on the agenda today? If there are none, thank you. Public forum. We have no notification of a public forum. So I'll move to item 5, which is confirmation of the minutes relating to the meeting on Tuesday the 22nd of June. Have those minutes in front of you. Councillor Newman, yes.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. I was just reading the minutes and I noticed that the last page 8 under item 9 that there was a discussion around programmed maintenance under the budget for Brock Camp, I think it is, and it was to come back to this meeting, but I can't see it on the agenda, so I just thought I would query, is that actually correct that it's coming back to this meeting, or is it being reported in another way?
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. Is there any, who do we look to for that and where that's coming back? I'm just looking for somebody to...
I can send an email to the committee.
Okay, I've just been advised we can we'll have an email sent around to committee chairs.
All members, sorry.
All members of, sorry, all
Not
committee
a member
members.
of the committee, but I am interested
Well, so members and committee chairs, I think would be useful.
Not committee chairs, thank you.
Yep.
So that needs to be corrected then, was it never the intent to have it come back to this meeting?
Well, it hasn't, so this is a method by which we can bring it back to this meeting and also broaden it to committee chairs, Councillor Noonan, which I think is appropriate.
Right, so for continuity, will it be noted on the minutes today that information will go to...
Yes, that action will be minuted under today's minutes. Thank you. Are there any other items of correction or clarification on the minutes? If not, would somebody please move that the minutes are a true and correct record? Mr. Murray, thank you. Councillor Dahlberg, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move now to item 6, Chairperson's report. Just make a comment in this context that clearly there's an item of significant public interest at the moment, which is of interest to everybody, I think, in regard to the major project at Green Meadows. I just want to remind people that we are in the process of getting legal and expert advice and seeking to recover all losses in this regard. Also that there is an agreement to undertake, the Chief Executive will undertake an extensive external review of the project processes, including Green Meadows, but taking the process of review wider than that. It has been agreed that the terms of reference for that review in due course will be signed off by the Mayor and the Chair of this committee. Also mention that in the meantime there are a number of internal reviews being undertaken, and there is a considerable amount of work going on at the moment, particularly in preparation for the legal strategy around this matter, and also in relation to ensure that there is no repetition, or as much as possible any similar instances can be avoided. So I would just ask you to be aware of that in the course of our our discussions today. So with that, I move that my report be received and take comments on it. Madam Mayor.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is important that the committee recognises, obviously the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee has a role with regard to oversight of risk, and we're going to have some further discussion about that later in the meeting and around the capital projects. I think it's important also that that we recognise that an external review is appropriate in this instance. I mean, this is a project that has had some major implications in terms of delivery, but a broader impact on, I think, the public's trust and confidence in council. And I was pleased that the council has confirmed its full trust and confidence in Mr. Doherty as Chief Executive. It's fair to say that this is an area that our Chief Executive had identified as an area that he wished to spend some time looking at and coming into the role, and that process is already underway in terms of how we deliver projects. But I think it is appropriate in this instance that there is a full review, and that has been certainly committed to by the Chief Executive. In terms of those, the terms of reference need to be worked through, and to make sure that that is a full and appropriate review. And I've got confidence that between the Chair of Audit, Risk and Finance and myself, we can receive some advice from the Chief Executive and work through that process to get that process underway. It is. I always think when these instances occur, there is an obligation on us to make sure, all of us, to make sure that we understand the why, the wherefores, and how we make sure that we improve processes moving forward. And I know that very much is the commitment from the Chief Executive that he's given to Council. So I thank him for that and for the openness in approaching this matter. That is really one of the significant changes that we have sought through with the approach from Mr. Doherty. It is one of openness. It is one of lifting council performance, and we have been quite overt about that, having made it one of our 4 key priorities for this long-term plan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Murray.
Thank you. Just perhaps a question that sort of leads on from the Mayor's comments. I'd be very keen to clarify what this committee's responsibility is moving forward in relation to these reviews and reports that are coming up. I'm pretty keen to understand just who has got governance oversight of those reports. It may well be council, it may well be governance, it may well be audit and risk. I think someone needs to be very clearly identified in that mix as to who is going to be driving and running and looking at this report when it finally comes through. And if it is audit and risk, I'd just like to know that it is audit and risk. So just a question follow-up in terms of where are the responsibilities and accountabilities going to lie moving forward with these reviews and the forward process. And that may not be a question to be answered today. That just might be something that comes back in due course once we sort of understand the scope and all the rest of it.
Thank you, Mr. Murray, and I think that is the case. I think the terms of reference will be clear. I think it's useful for this committee to be engaged in the terms of reference with a degree of independence. Obviously, it's a matter of significant interest to council as a whole, and to council as an entity. So, but I think our role can be initially in that first part in terms of the terms of reference aspects of it. But we will clarify that. Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just Mr. Murray covered the point I wanted, but secondly, I just want to support the Mayor on the comments about the Chief Exec and our confidence in him and the way we're moving forward. It's a real pleasure to see us actually functioning in that way, and I'm sure it's the right process to have a successful council going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg. I think those comments are appreciated. I would also just like to add, I've just been notified that a media release containing the information I've just talked about has gone out and is now up on the website. So that information is out there and for the public to see. So with that, I think the Mayor seconded my report that I had moved. Is there any further discussion on that before I put the motion? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Move now to the quarterly risk report, item 7, page 10 to 26, and invite Mr. Vaughan to join us. Mr. Vaughan, you know the procedure. The report is, take the report as read. Are there any matters by way of update or clarification you wish to add before I open it up for discussion and questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's really only one matter. The report makes reference to an exercise to test and develop the Council's responses to major disruptions. That exercise took place on the 27th of July, and we're currently working through the fairly copious notes taken by the observers as part of that exercise. I'd make 3 comments about that at this point. The first is that the Council has clearly moved a substantial distance from what happened in 2011, where 2 parts of the Council were charged with dealing with a major disruption here, significant flooding event, and the rest of the Council tried to function as normal. That clearly wore a lot of people out and didn't do any of us any good. And I would say that this exercise demonstrated that we've moved a long way from there. The second point I'd make is that we already know that we have room to improve our internal communications as a result of that exercise. That's not terribly surprising, I don't think. If you land people in these sorts of events, that's the thing which creaks a bit. The third comment I'd make, which interested me, was that the exercise showed that as a council we don't have probably a good enough grasp on our responsibilities versus those of the joint Nelson Tasman Emergency Operations Centre. And I think there's a little bit of work to be done there. We tried to do some things during the exercise that were properly the business of the Emergency Operations Centre. So those are sort of 3 key findings on pages and pages of notes I'm working my way through at the moment, and there'll obviously be more to come on that.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. In that case, I'll open the report up for questions from Council. Sorry, from the committee and visitors. Sir Dahlberg.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, just to start, one question on our page 18, which is managing risk. And it's to do with the reputational damage, negative public perception. And I see we've got a sort of a medium minor possible. I'm kind of figuring out where we got the minor from, but I'm kind of thinking as the example at the moment that's in the media is there is a certain distraction to all the and increased workload to the staff when these events happen. So I get it might be possible, well, it's probably more like probable. Over the last 5 or so years, I'm thinking even back to, and really it is more than minor when these things happen. And I tend to think that, I don't know, but it's just, so my question would really be, I read down there managing the risk, and I read the communication team. If I scored us on that, I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just saying we need to note that. And then again, I really look at the media policy. Is it sufficient? And do we, when the media are in the room, et cetera, have we got that covered off? Do people actually get a thing to say, you're having a media event with the council, this is our policy? Or do we have it internal and we talk about it, but we don't actually use it? If that's the case, then minor isn't what's going to happen, because it just keeps on growing. And it takes up a lot of time for people to get to the end of it and appreciate the public's concern. Because this project is a big concern and it does need the publicity, dare I say, to make us move. So that's my question on the risk, really on the negative public perception.
Thank you,
The question is, do the staff think we've got that in the right spot?
Vaughan?
Mr Chairman, I think I detected at least two questions in what Councillor Delberg had to say, and I will attempt to answer the first one and ask somebody more expert than me to respond on the matter of media policy. The first question related to the risk ranking, and I guess one of the things which is about how we assess risk is that we always look at levels of consequence and likelihood in pairs. So that, for example, in the case in front of you, you will see that there is a stated level of likelihood of something going wrong and a stated level of that consequence. We can also look at situations where there is a larger consequence, there's a larger something going wrong. There is generally, in such cases, a lower likelihood which matches that. And in this particular case, I think in the case which Councillor Delberg is specifically referring to, that's what's occurred. A lower likelihood event, a bigger negative consequence for us, has occurred. What I suspect that would do in this case is it would not change the traffic light level of risk assessment. That's my response to question one in relation to why it is where it is. It would still be a medium risk. It would be a larger consequence with a lower likelihood. And that's the nature of making these risk assessments. I'm not expert enough on the matter of the Council's media policy for me to be able to comment sensibly on that, and I'm not sure who I should ask.
Just through the
Paul, if you happy to comment from there, Paul?
Yes, just through the chair, just like to seek clarification from Councillor Delberg, just in terms of just clarity in terms of the concerns about the media policy, and then if you can just outline those, and then hopefully I'll be able to address them from there.
Yeah. So we have a media policy in the office. Do the media actually get handed that policy when they are, for example, communicating with one of our chairs or sitting in this room?
Perhaps I can have first crack. So the media policy effectively is for staff. We're the only ones that actually have to follow a media policy. The media don't, and elected members should, but don't have to. It's not, sorry, I'm probably putting that, in terms of direct control, in terms of a direct employment relationship, I can instruct staff what to do. Councillors are bound by a code of conduct process, which is more, I suppose, retrospective. But no, the media aren't bound by the policy at all. It defines how the council will interact with the media.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Thank you, Councillor Delberg. Mr. Murray, and then Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your report, Mr. Vaughan. I would like to make a couple of suggestions, and I'd like to see some further information included in future reports, if I may. You make a comment at 4.6 that the next steps is to include advice on the level of risk, blah. But anyway, I've got a couple of other next steps which I'd like to see come through. First step is I'd like to see a paper, it's probably a separate one, which talks about what our risk management framework is within the organisation, and that is what is the process which allows risks to be identified, and when should they be identified, and how do they bubble up through the organisation so that they're looked at by the right people, and what is that framework that everyone understands is how we go about identifying and managing risks once they start to crystallise. So that's something I'm very, very unclear on from the report, and something I've sort of been asking for a while. So I'd like to ask for that report. And the second bit is around the controls which you have mentioned in your report, and I fully understand the controls, but I get a little bit confused, and it's probably the heart of Councillor Delberg's question, although I wouldn't want to put words into his mouth here. But look, I'm looking for a sense of, particularly around the controls and all of these risks that we've got here, because really the controls are what manages those risks for us. And without the context of, say, a health and safety type mantra which says, well, we'll identify risks and then we'll take all reasonable steps to minimise that risk, which I'm not sure where that fits within this framework, so perhaps that's yet another wee piece to clarify. But what I get really, really concerned about is when I'm looking at the controls, I wonder who is responsible for the control and how do we as an organisation view the effectiveness of that control. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. If you go to page 16, and in fact I can pick any one of these controls and say the same thing. But anyway, item 1, maintaining lifeline services in the face of a natural hazard. And one of the controls in there is infrastructure planning, right? That's a control which manages this risk for us. But what I've got no sense of in here is how good is our infrastructure planning? Is it red, i.e. inadequate, or is it green, is it adequate, and actually who is responsible for making sure that that's effectively operating at all times? And then that'll give me a little bit of a sense of, when I have a look at all of the controls, how well we're actually managing that risk. Because I think what we've got here is a situation where, pick another one, 30-year infrastructure strategy. Well, how good is that? And if it's not good, do we need to make it good so that we can manage this risk and there hopefully move it from high back down into medium and so forth? So it's a bit of a sense of how good these controls are working and who's responsible to make sure that they're effective. So I sort of, when I read the paper, I sort of thought, well, yeah, I understand most of it and where it gets to, but they're the two pieces for me which I think we need to do as the next steps in developing our risk management policy and framework. So anyway, I'll just put those, that's my view, I'll just put that onto the table for the committee to consider, because of course it's not a committee of one, but perhaps I'll just float it out there for an idea.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Before I open that, your particular point up for discussion, two points I'll make on it. One is that if the committee agrees, it may be appropriate that you put a proposal to do that, so it goes on to the status report formally, so that we can have it as a continually monitored action. The second thing is in relation to your how-to questions, how's it going type questions around controls. I have a similar thought around treatments, what we are planning. There's no indication there of time frame, and some of these risks, the management of these risks can be scattered over a time frame of nice to have, we'd better get this done tomorrow spectrum. So I just wonder if you might consider that as being something in the thing here to look at as part of that part of the questions around the controls. Also cover the treatments as part of that. So is there any discussion on that, or Mr. Murray, would you like to put a proposal that puts it onto the status report and then we can take a discussion after that?
Yeah, I'm happy to move a motion to that effect. I'm not quite too sure how that would be worded, but the effect would be that we ask for a report which looks into
it's a framework and escalation, really.
Yeah, the framework for escalation and management of risks within the organisation, and also a bit of a, that's not the right word for the motion, but a report into the controls, who's responsible for that control and how effective it is in terms of its operation.
And timeliness of treatments.
Yeah, and I think that would pick up Councillor Delberg's question around the media policy, because I think his question was really how effective is it and is it working?
Okay. Do I have someone prepared to second that to go on to the status report? Thank you, Councillor Delberg. So take discussion on that if there is any. Madam Mayor?
reread the motion for us perhaps, Mr Chair? What it is that we're moving, what's been moved and seconded?
Can you read the motion back, Rebecca? Have you got a motion? Yes. Let's take a brief adjournment while we prepare that motion. Can we add to the last one again, please, the timing of treatments? Are we happy with that, the proposer and seconder happy with that? Mr Murray, Councillor Delberg, you happy with that as well?
Yes, subject to the committee's input.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, you?
I've got a series of questions on the report, so I just want to check that I'm going to be able to ask those if this gets moved, if this actually gets put. I've still got a bunch of questions, so I just want to check that. And if
leave this on the table and take it as a whole when we receive the report, so and that's
thank you.
I can either put this now and take discussion before I put the whole lot, or I'll leave this there as part of the
If you would, Mr Chair, because I've got a series of questions, because one of the questions I do have in relation to this is, to put it quite bluntly, shouldn't this be happening as a matter of course? Isn't this telling our isn't this a direction really saying to our management to do things that they should be doing already? I mean, it seems to me that's implicit on what should be happening, and I'm a bit astounded that we're having to move to get something to happen in that regard.
My understanding of the request is that this is about a report into that framework and escalation process that you're quite correct should be happening now. But it's not clear to this committee exactly what that process is. That would be correct? Yes. So, Councillor Dahlberg, and then I'll get Mr. Vaughan's comment.
Yeah, I'm just, you're on the right level for me. And if I look down a lot of these, it says, for example, contract performance management reviews, where relevant, contractors follow Nelson City procedures. You know, well, the elephant's in the room, so we know what we're... So how do we actually know that's being done, or when do we get told? That's probably the question. We're assuming it's being done. And what's the process if someone finds it's not? When do we finally get advised? And I'm thinking the contracts at the moment is interesting to me because we're doing ones on the sports stuff, i.e. Trafalgar, etc. So I'm interested in that and how do we actually know and where it fits in.
Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg. Mr. Vaughan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two general comments. First of all, in response to the first request, yes, this is a matter which was addressed by this committee when the Council's risk management policy and criteria were approved, and yes, it's a good matter to come back to, and I'm very happy to do that. The second matter I would like to suggest, or I'd like some direction from the committee, I think. This second part of the request, as I read what appears on the screen, is to a certain extent overlapping what I've foreshadowed in paragraph 4.6 of this report, which is where significant matters come to this committee and in fact to the council, there is properly an assessment of the risks when those decisions are made. And that is a matter which we are we're putting in place things to improve right now. Now, I'm not quite sure to what extent the committee wishes to duplicate that, or to where's the balance the committee is seeking between us attempting to do that for you as a whole, and this affects other committees and the council, and this committee. So there is a question there that I'd like some clarity on, please.
I'll pass to Mr. Murray for some clarification in a moment. I think the issue here, and I appreciate your question, you require some clarification on how to proceed, but I would encourage the sort of thinking at a high level in terms of what this committee is seeking, and that is the best way we can get some reassurance that the items detailed under controls and the items detailed under treatments and what we are planning are real, active and effective. And for me, that is the sort of high-level issue. I think in terms of this committee trying to define for you a format of how that might be done, I think that's something that probably we would leave to you, and also to ensure how that works into your current work program, because the last thing we want is duplication. That's certainly not the intention of the committee to create that. It is probably more, I sense, a dimension of sharing with us in a confidence-building way that the things that are happening here, while they look appropriate on this form in this format, there is another dimension in terms of the confidence, the assurance that these things are happening, recognising, and particularly under the item around reputational damage, and going back to Councillor Dahlberg's question, a sense that that particular process there hasn't necessarily worked in the recent incidents. Okay. So I think that if you keep the requirement at a high level. But Mr. Murray, did you want to add anything to that?
No, not at all. I just, you know, every time I look at one of those controls, I just go, well, how good is it? Is it in place and is it working? And do the combination of all of the controls, if they're weak, dare I say it, or if they're strong, then allows me some confidence that we're managing that risk or minimising it, as the case may be. So you know, I'd presume that if we put in a document, and again, I just look at page 21, first control there on page 21 is quality assurance and sign-off processes. Well, if that's in our document, someone must have in their mind what those quality assurance and sign-off processes are for a kick-off. So someone must know what that is, and are they actually working? And it may well be that we know what they are and they're working and it's a green. Great. Tell me. Just don't tell me what it might be with no context. I suppose I'm looking for context around those controls.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful, Mr Chairman.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I'm aware that Councillor Rutledge had his hand up some time ago, and
That's fine. Take the Mayor's question as member of the committee first, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Rutledge. Madam Mayor, then I'll go to the other member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I'm just going to come to Mr Vaughan. Mr Vaughan, I'm looking at the purpose of this report, and the purpose of this report is to assist the governance role of the subcommittee and overseeing the organisation's risk management. In your view, is this report assisting us in the way that it needs to?
Mr Chairman, through you, the simple answer to that question is yes, but I sit on the side of the fence marked writing the report. I don't think I can answer the question with certainty from where you're sitting. If it is clearly not, then we need to make some changes. The matter I was referring to in the request for guidance a moment ago was to what extent and at what level of detail does this committee wish things? We can clearly give you bigger and bigger chunks of information, but part of the objective, as I understood it and as I understand the terms of reference of this committee, is to, if I can put it as simply as this, to go up in the helicopter a bit and look across the council as a whole. That necessarily summarises some detail. And what I'm looking for is a sense of at what level you want more detail repeated.
Well, Mr Vaughan, what I'm going to, through you, Mr Chair, what I'm going to ask you is I'm going to take you to page 19, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be very direct in this meeting today, because if you haven't picked up by now, staff, I'm not in a particularly good mood. Page 19, I've got a report later in this agenda that tells me that the capital projects are significantly behind what they need to be for the end of the financial year. So you've given me a report today that tells me that there is no risk movement at all in relation to contracts management and that compromise council service performance. There's nothing there. Now, it may be that what we're doing is that in terms of identifying what the risk is, we're actually stepping over what are the most critical risks. And one of the most critical risks is failing to deliver on the contract that we have with the community in relation to our long-term plan. But I'm not seeing you actually in this report. I will go, we have a major project that is severely behind time, has caused, has come to the council with exposure around significant quality issues, time delays, impacts on the community, and none of these risk movements have moved in this report. And what I would really have been looking for is about perhaps, depending on how many months ago you want to go back, some indication that there might be a flag coming, but no flags come through this report. There's no flag here at the moment or any changes in this. And I'm actually sort of having to look at this and say, we've made a significant investment around risk management, but I'm not sure that I'm seeing the outcome that is intended for the purpose of this report. So that's quite a long sort of speech. But Mr Vaughan, I'm looking at these wondering why aren't they picked up? See, I find it quite extraordinary today to receive a report around risk management and the Green Meadows project is not mentioned at all. Can you explain to me why that is?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you, Mr Chair, through you again to the Mayor. When I came to this organisation, my boss at the time said, your job is to help to sort out the council's contracting. And I said, well, can you tell me about why that's a matter of risk management? And she said, well, I think you should go away and look at the numbers. So I did. In round terms, the council's income is about $100 million a year. In round terms, on an average sort of year, 75 million of those dollars goes out the door to contractors to provide services to the community. It goes up and down quite a bit. Sometimes it's actually more than our income. We borrow money to do big projects. Other times it's less. This one page is attempting to look forward and say, what are the risks coming at us with respect to that whole portfolio? The figures, if I recall correctly, and somebody can correct me, for the Green Meadow Centre are over 3 years. There was about $4 million worth of expenditure on that item. So that is one project of some significant interest to the community, and nobody's denying that that is of significant interest to the community, or that the failures are a poor state of affairs or regrettable. But this report is intended to give this committee a helicopter picture of the totality of services being contracted.
So, Mr Vaughan, that doesn't help me in the sense of, if I look at the totality of the services that are being delivered, and we're going to come to a report later in this agenda that tell me in the totality of the services that are going to be delivered, there's a major gap between the contract with the community and what's occurring. I would have expected to see that in this report. And I'm wondering why I haven't got it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Chief Executive wants to say something, but just before you do, Mr Doherty, if you're right, something that's just come up in that last exchange sort of resonates with me, and that is a matter that the risk management process, framework, mechanism, and to some extent report does not exist purely for this committee. The risk management process is for all the committees, for all the staff, for SLT, for council as a whole. And so a focus on perceived needs of just one committee here might be a very, very small component of an overall risk management mechanism. So I think the questions that are being asked in relation to this aren't necessarily, this is one mechanism by which we might do it, but the background around escalation mechanisms and effectiveness of this process as a whole is in its relation to serving the organisation in its entirety.
Yes.
And I think we need to keep that in mind rather than just looking at what's coming to this committee, recognising that we will, of necessity, have a higher level view of some of it than the individual committees have, but who should also be served by this process. If I can hand to Mr Doherty now.
So one of the conversations I've been having with the SLT over probably the last 3 or 4 months is to improve our corporate reporting. And that's to provide more granularity than this report provides. So what the two Nickies are working on at the moment is a report structure that would go to each of the committees, so that each of the major projects, and probably major projects is probably anything over about $250,000, would be reported to the committee, probably have a page of its own that would talk about the risks, the issues, budget, and report on time, budget and quality, so that each committee can have a very specific discussion on each of those projects, plus any other projects that may be less than 250,000 but are important, because sometimes there may not be a lot of money, but there may be a lot of risk for the council. So as part of that, we will be attempting to report on each activity's budgets as well, and then that would be collated, and I'm thinking that maybe the projects over $1 million, they also come to audit and risk in parallel to the helicopter view, so the council can see the specific projects, and we'll be quite blunt in terms of what's going on with those projects, and give you the chance to discuss them, so that there'll be a principle of no surprises applied. That's the plan, and we are aiming to introduce that for the September quarter. And we will be running that template past the Chair of Audit and Risk and the Mayor to make sure it meets their needs. But we see it as being an iterative process, but the idea is to have a common template for all the committees, so that each committee gets a chance to talk about the projects that are under its purview, and the activity budget under its purview as well.
Chief Executive, that's useful. Madam Mayor.
Sorry, Mr Chair, I really just need to come to page 19 and understand how, Mr Vaughan, in your report you've come to no risk movement. I hear what you're talking about, but inside this organisation, you must be able to see the impact of a project where there are inconsistent quality, there's quality control issues, there are delivery issues, there's budget issues. You must be able to see the impact of one of the, a significant major project not going according to plan, and I find that, I'm afraid in terms of considering there's no risk movement, and on page 19 for ineffective contracts and management of contractors compromising council service performance, I find that difficult to reconcile. So I need you to try and explain to me how you would see that as no movement.
Okay.
What factors you take into consideration. I hear the overall budget, but I'd have to say in terms of the overall budget, if you think about who are the key players in this organisation who are now dealing with the repercussions, then surely just in terms of that issue, that has an impact.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'll attempt to answer the Mayor's question, which appears again to be directed at one particular instance, and acknowledge that in that instance a set of contracts originally, the majority of which were let before the council improved its own contracting tools and procedures, and which are still running, and these are not the only of those contracts which are still running. We estimate that it will take, unless we massively divert the council's resources, it will take until about 2021 to work through those older contracts, some of which are on a poor legal basis and some of which are fairly loosely specified. That's a simple fact of history. And at the other end, that we are steadily improving the contracts we let to contractors to deal with those factors. And I'd mention two things in that regard. We now have a particular set of legal contracting tools which are being used increasingly by local authorities across local government. I think we're up to 11 or 12 local authorities around the country use those now, including all of the top of the south local authorities. And the second thing is we're putting a very large amount of effort into improving the specification of the work to be done. I think in the past we have been, it would be fair to say, fairly loose in specification of some of that work, and obviously at times that works fine and other times it has not. We're clearly seeing an example of that now. So again, I go back to the point that on the one hand, we do have instances where contracts are not running as well as they should, and we have, on the other side, a series of improvements on contracting practice working through the organisation. Those two factors balance up in trying to put this on one page for you.
Thank you, Mr Vaughan. Might I suggest that based on your response, which was, I quite simplistically break into two areas. One is the actions that are being taken to and achievements being made to ensure that new contracts are in this space. But the second one is that there are a number of contracts still extant which still pose a risk to us until potentially 2021. And I would suggest that perhaps a comment in some way reflecting that reality of the two would be useful in this context, to understand that actually we still have a number of years of potential risk relating to those contracting areas, which should be there. Then there may well be a judgment that balances those two to come to this, but that's not clear at this point, and it doesn't highlight the fact that there is potentially one area of risk that might be moderate and another area of risk that might be minor, and they balance out to being medium or whatever it is a process matter. It's not necessarily an information matter, and I think it's the information side of it that we're looking to seek some improvement in.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
And I'm certainly happy to do that, and it will not apply just to item 4, which is the one we're discussing at the moment. Let's be very clear on that.
No, so through Mr Chair, what I need here, and I think the committee needs and all of council needs, is a report around organisational risk that is able to inform us to make better decisions on behalf of the community. And I have to say that I have some doubts that this report is actually delivering what I need as a governor. And I would say that, Mr Vaughan, in the sense of the reality of this report does not conform with the reality that I have as a governor at this point in time. And so if we have, as you're saying to us, a series of contracts that you've reviewed, and you say many of them, it won't be till 2021 until you have them resolved into a form where you're satisfied as an organisation that they are fit for purpose contracts. The question I have is, which ones of those are mission critical? And if they're mission critical, why are they not being reported up so that there's some oversight by the committee chairs that they've got a contract in the area that is not fit for purpose, has got some risk around it, and is sitting in the mission critical area for the long-term plan? And I have to ask again, if you've gone through them all, and you know that, then there will be some questions that I'm not in a position to ask here because we are in the process of receiving legal advice and looking at our approach to legal strategy around the Green Meadows project. But inevitably, I'm going to want to ask that question around whether that was one of the contracts that you deemed to be fit for purpose or needing some work on it. But given the fact that we are preparing our legal strategy with a view to recovering any losses to council, that's a question I would need to ask in public excluded, and the committee may well wish to do that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Dolbeck.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I think the comment about it's only one item, and we're talking about Green Meadows. Since I've been here, we've had additional time on the Brook Sanctuary, it's the School of Music, it's this one, and we've got other concerns that need work on. And then when I read the second sentence of that, managing the risk, it says, however, a substantial number of contracts which place the council at some risk remain in effect. So I get why we need to have two, but to me, if I'm focusing on the risk factor, and I'm 100% behind the CE and where we're heading, and this risk process, since we got into it about a year ago, it's heading in the right direction. My challenge still is, where the hell are the landmines hidden? And that's what I think we need to be highlighting here. And then I'm looking down the bottom at treatments, which you're saying, which is great, it's a nice way to say it, reviewing the procedure and policy to streamline the contracting process. So what's the timeline? We still got this going on in 3 years' time? Are these things still going to pop up? So that's my challenge, and I just kind of, if you want a couple of words, I think that the chair mentioned before, I like the idea, how do we know that the controls are real, active and effective? Because that's a bit I don't know. So then we say, well, that's our management bill. Get yourself back in governance. Well, we're doing governance, but at the moment we're putting out damn fires, which distracts people from where we're trying to get to. And that's my concern at the moment, is maybe we need to be highlighting the substantial number of contracts still in place. And I'm not a chair, so I don't get to have that challenge, but I get the feedback from the chairs that they get surprises here and there. And I'm now on the sports committee, so I'm seeing more of that as well. So it is a challenge for us. And if you don't want us meddling in management, because you don't want that, you really need to give us something that's dare I say, I like that word, real, active and effective. And how do I know so I can get my nose out of it? Because at the moment, the public is saying, shove your damn nose in there, Bill. I'm trying really hard not to make a lot of noise. That's a pretty big nose.
Thank you, Councillor Delberg. I'll come to you, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I've been listening to all the comments about what we're receiving in terms of the information. I've got a few feelings on it. In relation to page 19, Mr. Vaughan, you said you take a helicopter view and you say that this is looking into the future. I look at the rating for the risk that's been given here as medium and the fact that there's been no change. I personally think about this and what is the current situation. Do I have confidence that the current situation will not be repeated in future contracts? So I have difficulty in feeling comfortable about medium, because to me the history is showing that this could be repeated. So there's a risk of that. And the points that Mr. Murray raised, I agree with, but I would like to see this more where exceptions are brought to notice. And I know that, I guess that you think that exceptions would be coming up through the risk movement, so I'm surprised that going through them all, the risk movements are all virtually none, or else they are favourable, rather than looking at real risks. I'm pleased in the overview that you've mentioned the viability of the recycling scheme due to the lack of market for plastics. And you've said in your view that it's a very minor risk. To me, I think it's a bit more than minor. There's a number of effects and risks that worry me. One being that to deal with the problem that we're still going to be feeling good in recycling and collecting things, there's going to be a cost. And we know that the government's going to be putting in more central government levies on top of our local levies, so that the increases in costs for recycling are going to be reflected. And the risk to me is that the people will start fly tipping, and in a reaction to things that are going to be costing too much. So that's a comment about that one. You can tell me what you think if you wish. But I'm looking for more of a report that highlights the exceptions. We've got right through all of these major risks. We've got the controls and the managing it. What are we seeing as a risk? But not enough there to tell me where we are not achieving. Thinking about it overnight, preparing for today, I thought, now, are we covering all the risks in this report that I see that could happen to the council and the city and the ratepayers? And one that came to mind, probably you'll say that it is covered in the in risk number 1, natural hazards, but climate change has been occurring for a long time, and I'm going back to the 1980s, where the climate in Nelson in summer was different to what it's been for at least the last 15 years. We haven't had a very dry summer. And when we do get a really dry summer, like we have had, there is a huge risk. And what's worrying me is I'm looking at what's happening around the world, where there are dry places. We have the potential to become a very dry place, and we also have the potential to suffer what I see is happening overseas. People are lighting fires. I don't know whether they're terrorists or what, but to me there's a huge risk should we get a very, very dry summer. And I don't see this appearing anywhere in the report. So, interested in Mr. Vaughan's comments.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. I think this is an example and an indication of how something gets onto this report from whatever source it comes, and then what is its process of evaluation and escalation to a level of prominence and priority. So I think it's associated with that. But happy to see if Mr. Vaughan has any response to you directly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and there's a couple of things I'd like to respond to Councillor Barker on, and let's sort of take them in reverse order, perhaps might be the easiest thing. That the country, the Ministry for the Environment principally, has been advising local authorities on climate change matters for, since I left the Ministry for the Environment about 12 years ago. And I think it is reasonable to say that this organisation has been doing things in response to that for that time. Climate change has, in this part of the world, two types of effects, the best science anybody can tell us. The first of those is that we are likely to get, as you pointed out, more extreme weather. That is of both types, unfortunately. That is longer dry periods and more extreme weather events of the type which occurred here earlier this year and hit our neighbours more than us. And going back to 2011, we got another one of those which hit us more than our neighbours. And obviously there are changes which need to be made over time to the infrastructure to deal with that. And I believe that Council is making those changes, and you will see that happening in the way that the Council makes its decisions about its capital investments. I'm more referring to core service investments in that area, so things like stormwater systems and that type of thing. So yes, those things are being done. They are, I would say, if you take the best advice from the Ministry for the Environment, things which are likely to give more extreme events rather than massive change, if I can put it that way. That is, you're likely to get more tropical storms here, and you're likely to get longer dry periods. And you'll notice I've used the word likely twice in that sentence. These are not certain things, and so they're amenable to being dealt with by way of the risk tools. And we do that. Whether or not we have done that sufficiently in relation to the resources of the community and so on is a matter for the Council itself to judge, I think. But we're certainly doing things in that area. That's certainly my impression since being here. In respect of the matter of plastics recycling, I'm sure that everybody around this table is well aware of what happened, that principally China, but in fact other Asian countries as well, have decided not to accept what they used to accept from us as raw materials, our waste products, effectively, and that's depressed the price. There are then some questions to be asked in the larger view of the world, because that's not just Nelson City. It's certainly our neighbours and potentially New Zealand about what you do about that. We have limited capacity to do things about that, and I'm not sure what the answer on that is. I would point out that over the hill in, I'm going to get this wrong, Buller District, a cement plant got shut down recently, and there is an active investigation into turning that into a waste to energy operation for burning of wastes in New Zealand. Now, whether or not that transpires, they are the sort of solutions that we need to keep watching.
Thank you. Mr. Hall. Councillor Barker, does that?
The risk status for contracts, right, where I personally wouldn't have had it at medium on page 19.
I think what I'm going to do...
Both in terms of the certainty and also in the effect.
Yeah, I hear the point, and I think the point was also made by Madam Mayor, that this report at the moment, and I've taken some fairly copious notes on where you want this report to go, at the moment tries to take an overall view of a large amount of work contracted out to all contractors. The nature of risk is that uncertain things may occur from time to time, and they will be of various sorts. What we have seen in the case which we are still getting legal advice on is a risk which transpired, I suppose, is the word, and which we are now attempting to deal with.
So I think if I can try and summarise this, that represents where it is to date. Following discussion today, we might look to see some greater clarity moving forward in those particular areas relating to the ambient risk that still exists from similar type of contracting processes and those other ones that we feel are we're less exposed to. Okay, I'm keen to move along. Is there, Councillor Rutledge?
Yes. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions from me. I'm struggling to line up a couple of things that the officers are saying, particularly around the contract management side of things, and that is that the statement that this is a helicopter view and forward-looking, combined with the statement that last year there was significant improvements in the contracting processes. We've also, with the CEO's direction, taken steps to reduce our capital program and increased resources to enable the better oversight and management. So with all those factors in mind, if this is a big picture view and forward-looking, shouldn't we actually expect to see that risk reducing? And if it's not, then what does that say about the steps taken to date?
Thank you, Councillor Rutledge. I'll hand to Mr. Vaughan, but again, I think it comes back to the that whole area of sort of real, active and efficient, in terms of understanding what the impact is actually of those. But Mr. Vaughan, a brief answer from you would be useful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The answer to Councillor Rutledge's question is yes, over time. But the balance that we have at the moment of improving the nature of contracts on the one hand and the knowledge that we still have a fairly large inheritance from our previous not so good practices, if I can put it that way, is that we're not there yet. That's the simplest answer I could provide to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Councillor Rutledge?
I guess that potentially echoes the challenges that the Mayor's raised of this being a useful decision-making and informing tool for the governance table. The media risk stuff, one thing that did catch my eye was that we say the different things can result in negative and incorrect media, and the way I read that is that coming from the place that we are assuming that the media will be both negative and incorrect, and is that reasonable? Combined with the fact that from what I have seen and what we understand across the country about ratepayers' attitudes towards council and council performance and is that negative media is probably almost certain. And so even if we said it was still a minor impact but almost certain, I guess my question there is, if something is categorised as on the risk register as medium, does that would have a different set of actions to if something's categorised as high or low, I'm assuming. But within that medium categorisation, if something is very likely, does that have a different set of actions or treatments, very likely but minor, versus something that might be quite major but unlikely? Does that make sense?
It does, and I'll pass to Mr. Vaughan.
Thank you very much. The council in August of 2017 agreed a set of how you judged that. It formally adopted it. It's 2 A3 pages and it looks like this. And it because we are usually basing assessments of risk on qualitative judgments by people who are expert in a given field, we have a traffic light system for dealing with that. And it goes from green at one end to red at the other. And so likelihood can be high and the consequence small. And if I look at the what's formerly called the risk criteria which council adopted, that would give us for a very small impact and a very high likelihood, still gives us a medium risk. On the other hand, if you have a very significant impact and a very high likelihood, you've got a high risk. Now, those traffic lights then guide what we do in response to those uncertain situations. So the more the redder the traffic light, if I can put it that way, guides us to take more action, because we, by definition, any organisation has limited resources to deal with these things. So in effect, the risk assessment is setting a traffic light which guides us on action. This council was, for example, very clear, and I think it was this committee, that in the event we get to very high risks, the instruction is that this council is to be told as soon as possible with solutions by the fastest means practicable. That's at one end. And at the other end, we obviously carry a number of low, medium and low risks that we're working on all the time.
So, sorry, I'm not sure that Mr. Vaughan understood my question there. The question, I'll try and be specific as possible. If a medium risk item is right up high on the likelihood, but therefore to be medium lower on the impact, does that put a different set of mitigation strategies and actions that the organisation takes versus something that is a medium risk, but it's low likelihood and a major impact?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. And again, Mr. Chairman, through you, the answer to that question is yes, it does, because the nature of what you do in response to the risk is always different. Can I illustrate the point by talking about where Councillor Rutledge started on his question, which is in relation to media response to things that council does. In my time in public service, media response has gone very substantially from mainstream newspapers writing stories and in what I would say is a fairly considered way, to a very significant amount of that response coming from social media at very high speed. The way that we respond to those things, and if you wanted some more detail on that, I'd be very happy to ask Paul to give that detail, has changed as a result. We have ways of responding to social media events very quickly. So that's different from situations where there may be longer terms and longer term actions.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just wondering about the risk movement in this. So I'm aware of a bit of the phenomenon, I'm sure we all are, that when something goes very wrong, like Green Meadows, it increases the propensity for people to see many things as being the work of a council that's not doing too well. And so it ramps up the environment of negativity. And I note that we're getting a lot of criticism at the moment for the Haven Road cycle project, which is an NZTA project. But again, because of the sort of general environment of negativity, that gets put back onto council. So I guess my question is, given the environment that we've got and are likely to have for some time moving forward, wouldn't the risk increase as opposed to no movement?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that I've understood the question. If you'd like to have another go, I do apologise, but...
Okay.
You just clarify the last part. Wouldn't the risk be what?
So there is with the significant negativity around Green Meadows, it creates an environment where people more likely to see council as underperforming on a whole range of areas. And we know that Green Meadows is unfortunately not going to be resolved quickly. So as this is looking forward, why do we not assess the risk as being a bit higher or as opposed to no risk movement?
Can I just clarify here, Councillor Rutledge? It sounds to me as though you're asking the same question that actually was covered earlier in why there has been no risk movement in some, the risk movement is shown as none in some of these areas when quite evidently there has been much higher profile. And so I'm conscious of how long we're taking on this particular agenda item.
I guess this one specifically.
If it is a if it is a duplication of an earlier question and the response that we got, which is difficult to be definitive about, but if it's a fresh question, then can we phrase it in a way that does?
That's at your discretion, Mr. Chairperson. I think the question about this item hasn't been asked, and that's why I asked it. But if you feel it has, that's your call.
I mean, I'm not sure what can be added to that has already been said, and Madam Mayor, you're looking at that. Perhaps you can assist in this space.
Okay, and then I had a final question on a completely unrelated matter. Low down.
Do you want you to be satisfied that you have got something?
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe it would be helpful to understand, and I think this is the purpose of the additional clauses in today's what's up on the screen, is I guess as much as with Councillor Delberg on this is that we, very clear, direction about keep your nose out of management matters, but actually when it comes to this committee, we are going to delve into them because we need to understand the processes and systems that are set up to ensure this organisation operates with appropriate risk management. So I want to understand, Mr. Vaughan, what layers of information do you gather to create this report? So, for instance, in the relation to we'll use this one, in terms of relation to perception of council at the moment, what level of inquiry and knowledge do you take from the rest of the organisation to create the rating that you've got today? Okay. Who do you talk to and how do you create this?
Mr. Vaughan, bearing in mind Councillor Rutledge's question in association with that might assist.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, with apologies, the answer is going to be a little bit long. And I will do my best to summarise it, and we may have to come back. The council is managed day-to-day, operationally, through its business units. So we assess and manage risks at a business unit level. Each business unit is required to keep a record of those risks. It's called a risk register. And they're required to update, this is an internal requirement on all business unit managers, they're required to update that record not less than quarterly, which matches this report coming back. I can expand on not less than, but in the interest of time here, I won't. Those are brought together by me, and I often sit down with business unit, senior staff and business units or managers and ask questions about those, and they form one major component of this report. Other elements go into that, which are observations on significant projects, observations on where the organisation is going but has not got there yet. I would make the point, I'll go back to paragraph 4.6 in the report to illustrate an example of that. So these assessments form the basis for changing the back part of this report at what I'm now seeing requires some more direction from this committee. I'm very happy with that. To give you an overall picture, our intention was never, because the piece of paper would be very long, to give you a line by line on every single item of the council's business. Those things, and I've talked with a number of senior staff about this, and I think the Chief Executive has referred to this earlier, those things should most usefully come to the particular decision makers on the particular committees to deal with. and it is the area we're trying to improve right now. I think that's as short as I can make it, so I apologise.
If I could just, because I think we're going to have to pursue this, what's up on the screen here, because I think we're going to have to pursue this another day. Not too far away, I hope. But what I'm understanding is that this report is developed by way of a risk register being filled out by the business unit managers, and so we rely on the business unit managers to adequately assess the risk that is then collated into this document. So in relation to, and let's go to the reputational management and negative public perception, there is no movement in that, so I'm taking it the business unit manager, presumably somebody has responsibility for that, or they all do, see that there's been no change in that. And so that's what you report, essentially with some other factors going in there. But essentially, if the business unit managers are not, so if they see no change, that's what we're going to see reflected here. What's some other...
That's a very black and white reflection of what I just said, and it's a shades of grey matter,
No,
which I can extend in detail if you wish.
All right, so that would seem to me that we might just have to look a little bit, let's put some other wordings, other words in what's up on the screen, Mr. Chair. So I'm taking that. And the other part I'm taking from this is that there might be a netting off effect, which is what I think I'm looking at, a netting off effect that we could potentially have a project that is a steaming train wreck, but if we've got one of those that is a steaming train wreck and we've got 8 over here that are trucking on licensing, it might get netted off so we don't find out about the steaming train wreck out of this report. I think that's what I've got to today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I can confirm it's not my expectation that steaming train wrecks do not come to the attention of the powers that be. Now, Councillor Rutledge, you had one final question before I pass to Councillor Dahlberg.
And it relates to the risk number 7, loss of specialist expertise. And I'm just wondering if we could get some comment from the CEO potentially around how we are tracking with regards to our ability to recruit the skilled staff that we need, because I am aware that there's been some challenges in that area, and there's been internal promotions to fill gaps, and so are we being able to recruit in the types of talent and levels of talent that we need to sort out some of these other concerns?
Thank you, Councillor Rutledge. Before I pass to the Chief Executive, I just remind you may or may not be aware that we actually had a detailed report come to this committee, I think it was 2 meetings ago, on this whole area of some assurance around there, but I'm happy to ask the Chief Executive whether he has any updates at this time.
So as I was arriving, I think our turnover reached a peak. Not my fault, my arrival, I would hasten to point out. And so at that stage, despite our best recruiting efforts, we weren't making ground. We were probably losing ground. Turnover has dropped quite substantially in the last 6 months. So we are now making good ground against the vacancies and starting to recruit the new positions that the council provided funding for. Because that was one of the questions you asked, well, why hasn't things changed? Well, we've only had extra funding for those extra staff for a month. So, and realistically, we'll be recruiting probably all year to get all those people in place. So that is helping. I was very pleased with the standard of the applicants we got for the 2 GM positions we advertised. There are some roles that are tough to fill. Project managers, roading engineers, IT specialists, and planners. And that's the same across the country. And the other thing that makes it hard here is our house prices. We traditionally used to recruit from most of the South Island. Anyone on the South Island wants to come and live in Nelson, still does, but they look at our house prices and they're a little bit discouraged. So now we're recruiting more from Auckland, and so that presents more of a challenge as well. We're doing okay, but I think we still have 2 vacancies in the projects team. We have been filling vacancies, but there have been some internal promotions, which is good news, except I've still got a hole, and then you start again. And nor am I convinced that we've got the right number of staff in the projects team either. I don't want to go into detail here, but there's probably 3 business units I think are more seriously under-resourced than others. And that's where I'm having some conversations with GMs about filling those holes and getting some extra bodies in as quickly as possible. But realistically, even if we were to start advertising today, we'd be lucky to have that person, because they're almost certainly going to have to shift town, to have them here by Christmas. In fact, imagine Christmas is probably already too late. So we are making progress, but, you've given us budget over 3 years. We did talk about it in the LTP. This is a 3-year journey. And we're just really starting on that journey. And the council has been incredibly supportive with fronting that lifting council performance and providing that extra funding. But we're only a month into it.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty.
And thank you, that is helpful. And I guess the slight flag that I have when you say this is a 3-year process, the capital works program is not, it's a year by year, we need to deliver. So does the staffing situation that we have put additional risk into that we might not be able to get on top of as quickly as we had hoped?
Absolutely, yes. I had hoped that we would at least fill the vacancies, but I suspect I probably need, I think there's 16 in that team. I think I need another 2 on top of that, and at the moment we're running at about 14. So yes, that does present a risk going forward, and then you outsource more work, you have less eyes on it, and then you run into the risk of quality. So we are actively recruiting for the 2 extra positions, and I'm talking with the GM about identifying where those other 2 roles would be and advertising those as well. So we are moving as quickly as we can. It is a priority area.
Finalised then, and so I absolutely hear what you're saying there, and that sort of lines up with what we hear then. Why is that increased risk not seeming to be reflected in what we're looking at today?
I think if I can interject here, I think we would say that it hasn't been an expectation of this morning's discussion. Councillor Goldberg, you've had one. Can I just check that this is the final discussion? I'm conscious of how much time we've spent on the risk process. I'm conscious that also that it's a major topic and a useful conversation to help us move forward. I just want to check it. Is Councillor Goldberg,
I have another small matter.
And then we'll move to the recommendation.
Yes, and
changes to the recommendation.
Thank you.
Councillor Goldberg, Councillor Barber.
I'll keep mine short, thanks, Mr. Chair. It's item 10 and the legal advice, well defined and early. I've got to say congratulations to the CE on the control number 1 in-house legal advisor. Apparently now being moved up to level 2, and we're seeing an early advice on some of our challenges, so well done on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goldberg. Comments appreciated, I'm sure. Councillor Barker.
And that was the risk that I was wishing to make a quick comment on. If I look at risk number 3 on page 18, one of the controls we have is councillor code of conduct. And I would like to see in risk number 10 on page 25, which looks at the legal implications and liability and loss of reputation, for as a flag that one of the controls be inserted there, the same as it is on 3, councillor code of conduct. I would like to see that there in those controls.
Valid point. Thank you, Councillor Barker. I think that's duly noted.
Can it be done without resolution?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. I've written a note to that effect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. What I'll do is I'll ask for somebody to move and second the recommendation, and then we can put amendments to it, or do you want to do something before then, Madam Mayor?
Mr Chair, if I could just suggest, I'm just looking at the first read clause there, which requests a report that looks into the risk management framework and escalation of risks once they materialise. And in light of the conversation we've had, I wonder whether what we're seeking is a report that that looks at the business unit manager's use of the risk register, risk management framework and escalation of risks once they materialise. And the reason I'm focusing on that is because I'm understanding from Mr Vaughan that that's how he develops his report, through the business unit managers. So I'm looking at where is the source of the intelligence that should be applying its mind to risk, and it seems that that's where it is. Now, if the mover and seconded thought that was too specific, we could just use the management use of the, and I'm going to say the risk register, because that seems to be the item that sits behind the risk management framework and then the escalation of risk. I just think to try, because I think that's essentially where we're getting to. We're looking at this and saying, well, you know, have we got confidence in the process that actually builds this report? But I'll leave that with the mover and seconder to consider.
Could I suggest that something like a report that looks at the risk framework, including
Yes, that would do.
risk adoption, risk escalation, business unit participation, something along those lines that...
I'll leave that with Mr Murray, who's the mover.
And I also, just as you were talking, Madam Mayor, I wonder about once they materialise. Risk is, there's a difference between risk awareness and risk materialising. And so for me, it's once the risk becomes, it's an awareness of the risk as opposed to it materialising. Because that's further down the track.
Yes, absolutely. Perhaps a good comment. I took it as implicit that the risk management framework would cover all of those matters. And I'm happy if you would like to go to a specified in the resolution to outline those matters, but the framework may well cover other matters as well. So yeah, I'm happy for more detail to be provided in there, but my initial wording, risk management framework, implicitly covered those matters, and I expected them to be covered. But I'd be happy for the detail to go on.
I tend to agree with you. A framework would tend to cover that, and I'm sure that we'll have a chance to look at that, and perhaps I could work with Mr Vaughan before it comes to this committee to make sure that it has got that level of content. And I suggest that perhaps we just talk about management framework and escalation of risks.
Yes.
And take out once they materialise entirely, because again, I think that will be implicit in the way that we look at the framework.
Would you like some detail in there, or happy to change that?
I'm sure as long as those matters are minuted, we'll be fine. They'll be able to inform the resolution.
Do we need a further resolution to consider that the report be adjusted to reflect the committee's needs?
We can do that subsequently. I mean,
What was that, Mr Chair?
I would have thought that would happen at the time the report comes to us, wouldn't it?
Mr Chairman, if I may, I read what is on the board at the moment as an explicit direction to adjust the report.
Yes, but I'm not sure those two amendments reflect the degree of change that the committee's looking for. I think the Mayor's comment was specifically fit for purpose, if I recall the exact words, which would need a bit of dialogue between yourself and the committee, I'd suggest, as to what fit for purpose might mean from this end. And I'm not sure if a resolution is what's required there, or if we leave that as a work piece for Mr Peters and Mr Vaughan to work through.
Sorry, I might have misunderstood you there, Mr Murray. So you're looking actually for a third part that looks like the risk management report reflect the changes requested in the discussion today?
Yes, but I'd use those words fit for purpose, because that might actually require further change.
Yep.
Than what's been
perhaps we could
discussed.
put that in as a third item, I think.
Yep. Okay. You keep asking me to do stuff on the fly. Request that the quarterly key risk report be revised so that it is fit for the Audit and Risk Committee's purposes. It's pretty generic, I appreciate that. Again, it's high level.
Are we okay with that?
I might need a seconder.
Sorry? Well,
What if we add reflecting feedback and discussion?
reflecting feedback,
And discussion today.
the feedback and discussion today, I think would satisfy that. Are we happy with that? You've moved it, you're happy, Mr. Moore, seconder? Any further discussion?
Sorry, Mr Smith, please, I just want to be clear, in terms of that last clause, was Mr Murray's intention that the report get revised as a result of today's discussion or as a result of the report that we're going to receive?
I think the two reports that we're going to receive will feed into that.
Right.
But it's not the totality of the revision.
Okay, so you'd like some changes now as a result of today's discussion? Because that's what that final clause says.
I believe so, because,
Okay, thank you.
you know, I'm looking in the first one for the framework, which actually identifies risk, how it bubbles up and how it gets through the system, and when, dare I say this word, materiality kicks in. You know, what should get escalated when and to what place. That's the first one. The second one is the integrity of the report around the controls, and the third one I think is to the point that, you know, we're not feeling as if this is fit for our purposes in terms of our governance role, and it needs to change.
If that's the case, the report has been moved, everything seconded, no further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. I suggest we take a 5-minute break before we move to item 8.
Who's that strange woman?
by all. Could you please update us on any matters that are appropriate of any updates or developments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that the report itself does identify every part of the internal audit plan for this year, which is why you've got some that we'd already decided were going to be either deferred or reconsidered next year. So that's why they're on the report. In terms of updating with any further information since this report was done, on the first item on page 29, which is regarding the contract renewals audit, I just want to say that there is a point there under the audit conclusion talking about how not all contracts go through the electronic purchase order system. They do now. We've been able to update that, so everything goes through the electronic purchase order system now, so we've got a lot more visibility over that. And in terms of the historic contracts that hadn't been saved into our document management system, there has been a work ongoing with trying to get that backlog into the system. I don't know what the current status is in relation to that, but I do know that some work has been ongoing in relation to that. That may need to have some additional resources put into it in light of our shortage of resources in other areas. So, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions. Obviously, we're going to move from item 8 straight to item 9, in which Ms Anderson will raise the new or outstanding risk exposures to the end of the 30th of June. So bear that in mind as you ask your questions. But Mr Murray.
I was just waving my glasses, Mr Chair, but thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. That's always appreciated. Thank you, Ms Anderson, for your report.
What an intuitive chair.
Just two questions. That's actually, I want another chocolate biscuit, but anyway. Two questions, if I may. One you can answer, and one I have to actually put back to the committee to answer. The first one is under external contractor, you've got the draft audit report to be completed before end of June 2018. Has that report been completed, or is it still pending, or where are we at with that? Oh, sorry, July 2018.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, those, I've got them in draft at the moment, and one of the main issues is I'm trying to get our risk framework aligned to what they've done, because as you will be aware, accounting firms have a different way of assessing risk, and so I'm trying to get that so that it looks more like our risk. So I haven't presented that to the senior leadership team yet, okay. Both of them in fact.
Yes, so ETA on that?
I'm hoping that I'll be able to, well, it just depends on how long it takes for them. We're doing dialogue backwards and forwards in relation to this risk thing, yep. But it'll go to SLT as soon as they're, yep. I've completed them, I'm satisfied with them.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Second question, and I'm not actually sure this is a question for Ms Anderson to answer, but a little bit concerned about the item that we have next to record keeping strategy and property information, of which I note in here that the council on the 21st of June decided that these audits will not proceed this year. The concern is around, I thought that the internal audit program come under the purview of this committee. And if these two internal audits weren't actually to proceed, then this committee should actually either ratify or sign that off, or I'm not even sure why council was cancelling those on us. So it's just really a matter for me to understand, how does council cancel programs that the Audit and Risk Committee has put into place?
Thank you. Ms Harrison has offered to respond to that.
So through the chair, I think the confusion has been that those two audits did go through this committee. It's just that they were recommendations to that council meeting that they'd be, yeah. So it's the reference to the council meeting that's probably confused you, but they actually did come through this committee first.
Lovely, thank you. I'm happy to be confused and be clarified. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mr Murray. Other hands up. Councillor Goldberg, did I see your hand up, or were you waving glasses as well?
No, I was heading down the same lane about the reports and adequately questions from Mr Murray.
Thank you, Councillor Goldberg. Any other questions? So just from me, this may be the place to raise this, Ms Anderson. This takes us through to June 2018. What's the situation with the new plan, the new audit plan?
So through the chair, there was significant, there's been discussions and part of the decision to defer a couple of those audits related to the fact that there'd been a reasonable burden to the organisation of the audit actions, and the chair, myself and the new chief executive have had discussions around how we can shape that internal audit program to be both an internal audit but then assisting the business with implementing those changes. So the intention is that the new audit program will come to this committee, the next committee in September.
Thank you. And just a reminder that I think at our last meeting we undertook to engage Audit New Zealand. Jacques could say in that in the final audit program. It was agreed that we would.
I think that was our discussion.
It was our discussion that we were going to do that. So that's something that we'll look to, and we can stay in touch on that. Thank you, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. For clarification, and bearing in mind your comments in the Chairman's report, looking at monitoring and management of contract performance, Ms Anderson has told us when it's going to senior leadership team. I'd like to know when it's going to get in front of our eyes, because I presume it's one of the internal reports that you mentioned in your Chairman's report are taking place in relation to Green Meadows. In relation to Green Meadows, you mentioned what's happening at Green Meadows, so to me this is pretty much integral, as Green Meadows is one of the major ones that's in here. So when is it coming back to the committee?
And I think any such report would be part of the legal oversight that would be being currently undertaken by the Chief Executive and the team.
And through the chair, just to add to that, the normal process is that if there are any high risk findings that come from the audit, then they would be notified immediately to the chair, and then they would come to the next Audit, Risk and Finance Subcommittee.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further comment? If not, could I ask that somebody moves that we receive the report? Councillor Dolberg, thank you. Councillor Barker, thank you. Is there any further discussion? If not, all of those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Ms Anderson, go to item 9, the new and outstanding significant risk exposure.
Right, thank you, Mr Chair. There are, of this report, there are 2 new items at the end, and I've endeavoured to highlight progress on the ones that are there from the previous quarter. So that's the format of the report. So you'll see that under the first item with the continuity planning, that we've had that exercise which Mr Vaughan gave you a summary of earlier. The next one, the control environment, it speaks for itself. It's not going to happen in a hurry. That we've got the resourcing has been approved by council. The third one, there's been some training that's been undertaken, so we believe that that's a good control to reduce that risk. And then on the new ones, I've already mentioned in relation to the contract renewals about the fact that the contracts are all going through the electronic purchase order system now. And that there's been a program in place to try and get all the historic contracts into Objective so that everything is more transparent. And bear in mind that this was about contract renewals. We were just taking it at a point in time with our new contract templates that we were using, just to make sure that when we were getting new, when we were writing new contracts, that they were following the new format, that people were doing things that they were supposed to do with this new template, and making sure that things worked the way that we intended them to. So that was what this particular audit looked at. I found that in that particular audit that we were using them pretty well, and that the way that the templates were set up, it actually required the person who was setting up the contract to save it automatically into the document management system. So that's closed that gap as well. So, I'm reasonably confident that what we're doing has made quite a difference to the quality of our contracts. Now, it's only about the contracts themselves, which is why we're having this other audit, which is talking about the management of contracts once we actually get ourselves into a contract. So that's that other audit that we're waiting for the final report on. Yes, so that's that particular one. Do you want to give me questions on that one now? Shall I move on to the next?
Well, no, just give us an update on them all, and then we'll take questions on the whole report, if that's okay.
Right, and so the final new one that's come up under the, so this was on looking at the preventions in place to make sure that we don't, that we've got good controls in place for the prevention of sabotage or contamination of our water supply. And I feel pretty confident with what we've been doing. And I looked at international research to see what our real risks were. We've got some really good controls in that we do use chlorine. We've got very good filters. We've got vast areas and different areas for our water source. We've got duplication of lines where there might be a risk from our water source to our treatment plant. We've got lots of reservoirs. We've got locked lids on, so the areas where there are risks, we've got locked lids on our reservoirs. We do testing very frequently, and there's very good recording of that testing. We've got SCADA, which gives us that information on time. And I think that in general we've got some pretty good controls. So I know from the research that our biggest risk is in backflow preventers, and we've got a program in place to make sure that where we're at higher risk, that those are being put in place. We've given ourselves a period of time. We're reassessing that at the moment, whether that time period is adequate or not. The most risk that we're going to get is from a commercial area, and some commercial areas obviously are more high risk than others, and we're attending to our program of putting these in place in an order of high risk. So I'll take questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, water contamination under the findings column, the last paragraph, Council's external engineering contractor is going to provide a report. Who is that? The external contractor?
Through the chair, it's Tonkin and Taylor.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Walker?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was when reading the section on water contamination and the possibility of sabotage last night that I thought of the matter that I raised earlier. A similar sort of risk, sabotage in a drought period, people lighting fires. There was a suggestion many years ago that one had happened in the Tantaree when a big fire in 1983, I think. It was never proven, but I would like to see that this is a risk that we should be managing too. So I would like to know that the procedures when there's a drought, dry period, access to council properties with combustible material is prohibited, for instance. So I'd like to think that we have some procedures in place to think ahead about what the risks are and how we would manage them in that sort of event, or the risk of that event. Is there another one we could add to the list?
Through the chair, so that's normally handled by the Rural Fire Authority. They monitor risk, they have weather stations, and then have a gradual process of closing off the valleys as risk accelerates. So I am aware we've done that in the past, and that would still be the way we would do it. So the council would cooperate with Fire and Emergency New Zealand, who are the Rural Fire Authority.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. I'll take Mr. Murray as a member, and then Councillor Noonan.
Thank you again for your report, Ms Anson. On page 33, the third item down there, 1, 2, 3, yes, you've got some work around the control environment, and you've got some findings and some recommendations, and given some of the discussion earlier in the meeting, I think you've probably hit a nail on the head here. So what I was, first question is has this matter been closed off for you in terms of completion? And if not, or maybe even if it is there some further reporting that you could do in this matter to give the committee some assurances that the recommendations that you've got there have been effectively implemented within the organisation?
Through the chair, no, it hasn't been closed, but my next move would be to have a conversation with the risk analyst to decide whether we're at a point where we need to be keeping it on high risk, and if not, and with the person who's responsible for this, and if not, then it will be treated accordingly. So if it's at a medium risk, then it has a different form of treatment.
Okay, so just understanding that you'll have a conversation with the person responsible for this and then satisfy yourself that it has been addressed appropriately, and then if it has, you'll remove it or reduce the rating from high to something else because the controls have been put in place to satisfy this.
Effectively, yes, that's not exactly the process, but that's effectively what would happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noonan.
Well, thank you. This is exactly the item I was going to ask about, and I'll just add a little bit to it. Mr. Murray started the conversation for me. I read with some concern that that there is a low level of maturity across the council for the risk that some of the decisions may be made. That the outcome is that the decisions that we make may not be the right ones, or the risks haven't been assessed. The risks on the reports are something I absolutely rely on. So if they're not identified, then it does affect decision making. So I guess my question is, until someone is comfortable that the maturity level assessing risk is addressed, what mechanism do we have in place to check that that these are identified?
I'll just get Mr. Vaughan to answer that.
Well, I'm just wondering if I'll look to the CEO first, and then so if required, he can call on Mr. Vaughan.
Through the chair, we have a peer review process where every report is read by some GMs. So there's I guess a significance test done, and they're either read by by two group managers or by the full SLT. But every report is read by me, and that's one of the things we look at specifically is have we got the risks right? But that's what part of what this training that's being rolled out is about, is getting staff to lift their heads and not just look at the risks around their project, but what the risks are to the organisation as well. So we, and that peer review process has toughened up since I've been here. There have been reports that have missed a meeting cycle for no other reason than they haven't met the standard.
Okay, thank you. No further comment are required, I think.
Just simply, Mr Chairman, through you, to refer back to paragraph 4.6 in my report earlier today, where we are putting considerable effort into improving the level of what I'll call information on uncertainty in the reports coming to council, and you will see that roll through in the next, I think in the next quarter.
Thank you, Mr Vaughan. Further questions for Ms Anderson in relation to the new and outstanding significant risk? Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Lynn, thank you for this work. I find your reports very helpful, very easy to understand, and appreciate the clarity of your findings, so thank you for that. I guess, coming back to that control environment, I just questions very similar to Mr Murray and Councillor Noonan, and of course the issue I have is that what you're finding for us is that exactly this is a reflection on the report that we've just had, to say we're a bit puzzled about how this could be, and I think your findings tell us that, which they do, that the Council Business Unit registers vary in completeness and review. There's no central register for senior management accounts to have oversight. While there is risk framework, the risks are not fully understood or applied by the officers, so that often a robust risk assessment will not be performed. So you can imagine as a decision maker how terrifying I find that. Absolutely. So I really do need, obviously this has been, we've been working our way through the internal audits. I'm somewhat concerned, and this is probably a question for the Chief Executive, that there wasn't a self-awareness here from the senior leadership team around this risk. So I'm somewhat concerned that the internal auditor brings this to us today, but that wasn't something that was a risk identified already by the senior leadership team. And maybe it was, but then I'd be asking Councillor Noonan's question of, so what mitigation was put in place to manage that risk?
Chief Executive.
So you're talking about the risk regarding incomplete risk registers and a central register?
Well, I'm concerned about the fact that what we've got in the report is that risks are not fully understood or applied by officers, so that often a robust risk assessment will not be performed. Because in bringing forward reports, it's a key. On the back of our reports, we have a section that goes with it, risk assessment. And so, to me, that's an integral part of assessing, is a report fit for purpose. And there's a series of steps that are gone through before a report comes to a committee meeting or a council meeting. It's gone through a series of gateway tests. And I'm just surprised that it's taken. That in going through those gateway tests, well, I'm wondering what gateway tests were gone through before previously. I understand you've obviously brought in a new mechanism for dealing with this and addressed it and identified it and are now doing more, but where were the gateway tests previously? Maybe that's not a question you can answer. Maybe, because it seems rather fundamental to me. I just... Given under the Local Government Act, we're required to, we make decisions. It's very clear what we have to do. We're not supposed to sit at this table and make decisions based without receiving advice. We're supposed to receive, good advice to make our decisions. We're not just supposed to go make it up for ourselves, make up our own advice, and then make decisions on our own advice. The system is set in place with a series of steps to ensure effective decision making. So I'm just this is very much a governance question to go, have we had an appropriate, previous to And obviously you've got as you said, you've identified some issues that needed to be addressed. You've been very upfront about that with elected members, but I'm just wondering from the organisation, what happened previously? What was happening there? Because there seemed to be a requirement under the Local Government Act for us to take a series of steps, and I'm feeling like something may have been missing.
Through the chair, certainly there was. Bear in mind that this audit was completed, I think, November, December. So, and it was completed before the CE came. We have put in place quite a few different, we've had to work out how to approach that, and I think in many ways we have made a lot of improvements. We've decided that we need to get more risk mature. We've decided that we need to address our contracts and then get into our contract management. So in terms of our decision making, I think we've got a whole lot better, because first of all we needed to understand risk, and there's been quite a bit of work that's been done on that ever since the CE arrived here. So yes, in terms of what it was like before, there were definitely gaps, but we are filling those gaps.
Mr. Chair, perhaps the question I've got is, has somebody made an assessment of the residual risk that we have because of the gaps that existed previously? I mean, have we done an assessment of residual risk? If we've been operating with gaps, November we identify very clearly, and thank you for those findings, Lynn. Chief Executives come in December and is immediately actioned, and probably could have anticipated from an initial assessment and has concurred with this as an accurate assessment, has taken some steps to address those, the decision-making process subsequent to coming in December. But my question as a governor is there residual risk from matters that have come to this table prior to this where there were gaps in understanding risk?
Not sure who can answer that question, Madam Mayor, but probably we should pass it to the Chief Executive to have a go.
I can't rule out that possibility. No. Lynn touches on it, is the busyness of the organisation. And so, look, in Kapiti, we hadn't got formal risk registers like this yet. We were probably 6 or 9 months starting down the process. So Nelson City Council was in theory further advanced, but the difference was that I had staff who could spend more time writing a report, sitting back, thinking about the risks as they wrote the report. And so the decision I have made effectively is, do I want staff to turn away from operational issues and potentially drop a ball there to finish these risk registers? It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. What we're trying to do is get more bodies on the ground, and I've talked about I need more third-tier managers to look at these things and make good decisions. I look at the projects that are going on, and I don't see, well, I certainly haven't revisited all the reports that were written in 12 months before I arrived. I know that you've got hard-working teams that care passionately about the council and the community. So I would think not, but can I guarantee that? No, Madam Mayor, I can't.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's something just through you to the Chief Executive. Perhaps what I will do from a governance perspective is ask each chair of each committee to have an active discussion with their group manager about potential for residual risks, because as I think the governors of the organisation need to have some assurance, that as much assurance as they can, in terms of residual risk. Clearly, we've had a process in place, and Lynn's identified it today, that has left opportunity for that. And so we need to reflect on that with what is here, and I think the officers need to really reflect on that, just to consider the residual risk profile for the organisation. I would have expected in some ways to have seen that identified in the previous report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Dahlberg.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chair. Yeah, I think the CEO covered off one of my questions on busyness, because I appreciate that, how that can put a challenge to getting the job done, moving to the next one. My question relies around the old contracts and the new template. So I'm assuming there'll be additional items in the new templates, and there'll be improvements, and there'll be something probably like new regulations, whatever we have to do. So my challenge, my question, I'm just, versus the old contracts, has staff actually reviewed contracts that are still in the old system going, gee, we know now we haven't done, I don't know, health and safety, checked whatever it is, and have we gone back to those contracts and seen if there's an impact that we don't know about? The only reason I ask that, that's sort of how I'd probably try and mitigate risk when someone gives me something new. Have we gone back and said, these are the paragraphs that are missing out of the old contracts, these are important, there's an additional risk, have we checked that out?
Through the Chair, no, we haven't done that exercise. New contracts are being drawn up as the old ones expire or when it's due for renew.
And I mean, what you raise, or what's a valid question, Councillor Dahlberg, it's actually a risk management issue. I think it hasn't been undertaken as an audit from of old contracts to see what's missing as such. But that's something that I'm sure in terms of I think it's a valid point to raise, and I think it's something that an awareness needs to be made. But obviously, the work hasn't been done from an internal audit perspective, and from I think our previous discussion, it's recognised as an issue at a risk level. Wanted to comment?
The reason I asked that is that there is a tendency when we get busy, and I appreciate the lack of staff, and I appreciate we're approving all that, but these little things keep coming back, and I'm just kind of, I know if it was me, I'd be going back and going, this is the old this is the new one, what's missing, till I get them on the new one, and I know I'm doing it, that's all right. So I'm just asking, is that a concern, and do we know there's some risk out there we don't know?
Well, I think the answer is we know it's not happening, certainly through an internal audit. I think it can probably be an adjunct to the Mayor's question to chairs of committees and their discussion with group managers to be aware of any, that's one area of focused attention that might be relevant. Ms Anderson, did you want to say?
Through the Chair. I was just going to say that there are a number of blocks of contracts which have been looked at because we've become aware that they're of these older ones, particularly.
Crack at that one.
Too much talk. I can't hear, you can't. Yes, there have been blocks of them that have been dealt with, which, for example, in facilities, we became aware that there weren't anything to measure performance against, so that they get dealt with and that kind of thing, so that we're at the same time that we're looking at the renewing contracts, we're actually looking at other areas of contracts, similar kinds of contracts where we haven't provided anything to be measured against. So I think there is a real awareness out there, which means that others might get changed at the same time.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any further questions in relation to report number 9? Madam Mayor?
Mr Chair, just one final question, and it's reasonably detailed, so apologies if you don't know the answer. Do we have a policy with regard to legal review of contracts, where a legal review is required over a certain amount, something to that effect?
Through the chair, we have legal review. So our contracts were actually formed by through a legal agency. So what we normally only get legal review for, or primarily get legal review for, is when we have any clauses that differ from our standard templates. I'm not aware of whether we do it for anything else. You may be able to correct me.
So through the chair, the templates were developed through Elaine Neve, who are a Wellington firm, and we use standard templates and effectively force people into using the standard clauses, and we take legal advice from them as contract lawyers if people are wishing to vary some of those clauses, be it around insurance levels, things like that.
All right, so if a contract was to come back, so we're into a negotiation around entering into a contract, the mechanism is that it's either exactly as per the standard template that's been approved, and if there were to be variations, then the officer who has responsibility for that needs to have it legally reviewed before it's signed. Is that the methodology we use?
And that's my understanding of the process.
So we'd be able to document that if somebody came in and they wanted to vary from that, we'd be able to see that contract went off to Lane Neve.
Yeah,
I will just say, a very good firm, disclose my slight conflict of interest because my daughter does work for them, but in Christchurch.
Thank you. Are you satisfied with that, or do you need to?
No, I understand that, so I just want to be clear that is the case, that there is a step, so nobody signs it until it has gone through the legal review.
Mr Chairman, if I might add a little clarity on this matter. Our practice now is when we ask for quotations or bids or proposals or tenders for any piece of work, that quotation, bid or tender is accompanied by what we call a contract form. That is one of our standard contracts with, one of our standard contract templates with all blanks filled in, except the name of the contractor. That contractor is then expected, when they come back with a tender response, proposal, quote, to acknowledge that they will accept that contract. If they do not, if they raise some matter, then yes, we go back for legal advice on the change they have asked for.
Thank you.
Does that clarify the... Thank you.
Anything further before I ask for a mover and a seconder that this report be received? So move. Thank you, Councillor Barker. Do I have a seconder for that? Mr Murray? Any further discussion? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Ms Hanson. And we move now to the corporate report, and welcome Mrs Hughes and Hughes. Just in terms of considering the corporate report, remind you that under separate cover came the major project status report, which we will be considering as part of the corporate report. So when we go through to ask any questions, that report will be in play, as it were. Also note that this report is to the end of May, which seems sort of quite a long time since the end of June. I would have thought by being in mid-August, we might have been able to receive the June report at this meeting. Is there any, I wouldn't mind a comment relating to the timeliness of this report according to that expectation. So if you can build that in, Ms Hughes, take us through any changes or updates or any other matters you want to bring to our attention before we open it for questions.
Good morning, through the chair. Yes, you've kind of stolen my thunder a little, because that was going to be my opening line about that May is quite some time ago. The reason you're getting this report to May is partly because the timelines between this meeting and the closing of the general ledger are often not happily coincidental. that's certainly part of it. And the other thing is that with June, June obviously, as we go into the annual reporting season, has a lot of potential for change. We review a lot of things annually, particularly in terms of impairments, consolidations, that kind of thing. So anything I gave you for June now, even if the timelines did align, would almost certainly end up looking quite a lot different to the annual report. So the draft annual report will be coming to you, I think, at your next meeting. So if I could draw your attention to the discussions under paragraph 4, as at the end of May, the activity surplus deficit's 7.7 million favourable to budget, and I've outlined there some of the more significant variances, because that is quite a large number. The other thing I want to point out is 4.4 and 4.5. You'll see, in conjunction with the capital graphs further along in the report, that we were looking not too bad against budget in May, and that situation changed quite considerably come June. So we have worked through a lot of the work for June, and we see that as at June we were underspent quite considerably against forecast, and part of the reason for that is that our forecast for the month of June is always very, very high, because that has been our historical pattern of spending. That wasn't the case in this year. So, yeah, so that's my highlights, as it were. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure some questions will follow around that space. Before we do that, I note that 4.5 gives an indication of the forecast underspend on the capital as at the end of June. Didn't notice whether we'd get one in relation to 4.1. We got any indication what the activity surplus deficit is likely to be looking like at the end of June? Appreciating your comments about subject to change.
Through the chair, no, because we do have some quite significant changes coming through this year. I can tell you that much, in the millions. So I'd rather not second guess that at the moment.
Thank you. Now you can probably hear me speak. So if subcommittee members are happy for me to do that, I'll take Councillor Walker first, followed by Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, through you. 4.5 and the $8.3 million underspend. Are we able to get just a short summary as to why, please?
Through the chair, I can summarise some of the larger projects that have underspent from my business unit. So we had predicted somewhere between 3 and 4 million when we presented the April figures, and my business unit is currently sitting at about 6. One of the projects that has underspent is the Neil Park pump station. So that's a project that is spanning the financial year. The construction hasn't stopped, it has just occurred at a different rate than anticipated, and about $1.1 million has been underspent over that time. This project's still within budget, and it's still within time frame. The spend just hasn't matched the profile that we predicted at the time. There are other smaller projects, the Saltwater Creek Bridge, which hasn't progressed as expected, and not a smaller project, but Saxton Creek. The progress on that has been different than predicted. But again, they're both projects that span the financial year, so are being spent into 18-19 as well.
Thank you. Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you. I'm just struggling to line up 4.4 and 4.5. So 4.4 says we're 18 million under approved budget and 3.5 less than forecast. And then 4.5 says that we are underspending against a forecast of 8.3. So it says 3.5 less than the forecast in long-term plan, and then it says 8.3 less than the forecast. So what are we actually under?
Through the Chair, 4.4 refers to the situation as at the end of May, and 4.5 the situation as at the end of June. So the forecast, I think, is just on 40 million or just short of 40 million.
Okay, and so you said, if I've got this right, you said that June number, we couldn't have the June numbers because they're likely to shift quite a lot. So what is that 8.3 number then?
The 8.3 number, excuse me, that's for capital. That is unlikely to shift. What I was talking about before was the operating surpluses.
Okay. Right. Well, that's a really significant number, and I'm looking at the Chair of Works and Infrastructure, and he's sort of nodding at me, and this is the first that I am hearing of that number as the Deputy Chair. This is quite counter to some of the conversations that we have had at our weekly catch-ups. So can we have a bit of detail about how this is quite significantly different to what's been discussed even quite recently? Because it is quite surprising, the quantum that we're dealing with here.
Through the Chair, I think that what I would say is what I said before, that when we presented these figures for April, for my business unit, we're anticipating 3 to 4 million, and it's come in higher than that. It's come in at 6. There's been less spend than anticipated. The majority of it is over one project, 1.1 million, Neil Park sewer pump station, which is behind the spend profile. And the rest relates to another couple of projects and a lot of smaller projects that haven't achieved the spend that was predicted by the end of June.
Okay, and so we've been talking about risk a lot today and other things. So why has this not come up through the committee structure? And so why is this report that is the first that the Chair and the Deputy Chair of Works and Infrastructure are hearing about this, and we're not members of this committee, so we've had to go digging to even end up here? What?
So that's a timing issue. This only became apparent just as this report was going to print, so that paragraph was added on at the last minute. That's why it's coming to this committee first.
Okay, so this information wasn't available yesterday.
At the time of going to print would be approximately 2 weeks ago.
Sure. Because I guess we have a structure in place to have a weekly meeting. So we're trying to get ahead of these sorts of things and understand them. So we obviously have work to do, so we'll leave that for a different time. In terms of the terminology that we use, and maybe this is just a personal bugbear, but when we're reporting underspend to budget, we're referring to those as favourable to budget. Whereas when we're talking about capital items and things like that, that's us not delivering things that we have told our community we would deliver to them. So I question why the terminology is that not delivering is favourable.
Thank you, Councillor Rutledge. Madam Mayor, you had your hand up.
As an answer to Councillor Rutledge's question. Apologies, I didn't want to jump the gun there.
Sorry, I thought you had answered the question and then you made a comment, so forgive me if I misunderstood that. Is there an outstanding
Well,
question?
it was I guess a comment as to why, but a question as well. If there's a good reason why that's the correct terminology, then by all means. But I don't consider that under delivering a capital budget by 20% is a favourable result.
Thank you. Does anybody want to comment on that?
Sorry, so through the chair, if capital expenditure is under budget, it is considered unfavourable, and it says unfavourable. Operating expenditure, when we're under budget, I think your question is more around why we consider underspending our OPEX favourable. I agree that underspending by a long way is unfavourable, but I do expect that we have a little bit of a buffer in terms of underspend so that we can pick up and deal with unprogrammed storm events, for example. So we've had quite a significant cost this year in relation to the storm event that we've been able to absorb within other savings. So I think that, yeah, your question is completely valid about why we view them differently, but certainly underspend on CapEx is under-delivering.
Thank you, Ms Harrison. I'll go to the Mayor and then come back.
Thank you,
back
Mr
to
Chair.
Councillor Walker.
Mr Chair, just through you, just a question for Mr Davies. So you've given us 3 items there. I recall back in the April meeting you told us, I think I've had some, again, watching the graph, obviously keen interest in that graph, making sure that we do deliver on the contract with the community. At that stage you identified 3 million, which was a concern to me. You had 3 projects, I think, in April. Do you recall what they were? I've got them written down, but I haven't got them with me. They're in my office.
Through the chair, I can't recall what those projects were. I think one of them was Saxton Creek, but I can't recall off the top of my head what those projects were.
I think I recall issues around Saltwater Creek, and I think your answer to that question, the problem there was that you were waiting on NZTA and something about, there was a suggestion that you wrote a letter to NZTA to sort that out. So how did that go?
Through the chair, NZTA confirmed the funding for that project. The project has been let and tendered, but we're still through the evaluation process, so construction hasn't started on the previous financial year. So the spend was less than anticipated.
So the delay to delivering that project was that, I think the reason given at the last meeting was you were waiting on NZTA, which we were a bit puzzled about, I think, as governors, given we're going, well, surely that's something to, they're sitting there with budgets to spend, there should be no reason. So I presume the answer was there was no problem with you proceeding with that project, is that correct?
Through the chair, I think at the time I stated that we wouldn't spend money on a project without ensuring the money was available.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so you sought confirmation from NZTA the money was available?
Through the chair,
and the money was available as expected, right. And I think the other one was, there was one other one, was related to Saxton, one of the roads at Saxton. I'm thinking around the cycle velodrome matter. Would that be the other one? Do you remember?
Through the chair, yes, Saxton Link Road, that could be correct.
And how's that going? So
again, that has been tendered and we're evaluating the tenders at the moment.
All right. So with the balance now, so we've now gone from 3 million to, and you've identified 6 million, so someone else in the organisation is sitting on 2.5 million that's running, 2.3 that's running behind. We'll find out about it in a minute. But with the remainder of the 6 million, so you've got 1.1 for Neil Park. What's the rest of it? So that 3 million already incorporated Saltwater Creek the last time. So what's that 6 million made up of? Which projects?
Through the chair, I can't recall off the top of my head. I think it was a small amount over a wide range of projects rather than big projects. So the 3 that I named earlier, Saltwater Creek and Saxton Creek and Neil Park, thank you. They are the main items that contributed to the largest
3?
sum.
Yeah, no, but now I want to know what's contributing to the 6, so I actually need to know. So somehow between the end of May, we went from 3.5 million behind, so April we were 3 million behind, then May we were 3.5 million behind, and then lo and behold, we're now, and I'll just give you 6 million, because someone else has got the 2.3, and as I said, we'll come to that in a minute. So what are these projects? Because and I think we need to know, this is absolutely critical to the performance of the organisation. These projects are enablers in many cases. We've had the Chief Executive just talk to us about one of the challenges to attracting staff to come to Nelson is housing prices. We have projects sitting in here that are infrastructure projects that are critical to releasing land for building houses.
Through the chair, my team manages over 120 projects. I can't recall all the details of each one for today, but I can certainly find that information and provide it to you.
Well, Mr Chair, I find this somewhat challenging. So I'm sitting here within the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee with a responsibility for oversight around these matters, and I'm finding it very difficult as a governor to try and understand how we get a correction in this process to ensure that we aren't running behind on infrastructure, which is, we know, one of the key enablers to city development. And today I've gone from 3 million in April to 8.3 today, and there's no disclosure on what those projects are, other than a few here that we've got from Mr Davies. I don't know which ones are, using the terminology, mission critical to delivering our LTP. And I'm not sure that that's adequate advice to the committee. Perhaps before, I'm going to just think about what we might need to do, but I would like to know who in the room can tell us about the rest of the 2.3 million if it's not Mr Davies? Who's got that budget that's running behind? Or is that in other areas?
Through the chair, yes, I do have all that data on my computer, all 140 lines of it. The only other thing that sticks out in my own mind as a kind of a group is about $700,000 in the IT area where we've been looking to implement improvements that haven't happened this year.
So through Mr Chair, so Tracy, why is that? Why hasn't that happened? What's caused that to delay?
In the IT area, it's often because the people who are tasked with delivering those implementations and those updates, they just don't get to it.
So through the chair, within the IT space, there are 3 projects that are behind plan. One's the E-plan, and that had been delayed because we'd been looking to work with other regional councils around a solution. And the other one is the building platform, the building control platform, the new online building control platform. That's running slightly behind plan, and so hasn't all been expended to date. And again, that's another project that we're working with TDC collaboratively, and we jointly tendered that project. The third project that is behind is the NMAP upgrade. That's 98,000 behind, and that again we are trying to work collaboratively with TDC to ensure that we end up with a single solution and potentially incorporate NMAP into top of the South maps as well. So those are the 3 major areas within the IT space. The rest outside of Mr Davies' area are probably in the renewals budget, which within the infrastructure renewals budget. But there will be a report being brought to the next Audit, Risk and Finance with the proposed carry forwards and the detail around each of these projects.
Through you, Mr Chair, and I'd say that is getting too late. So what I'm looking at here, and I'm very concerned that I've got a chair and a deputy chair of Works and Infrastructure who meet every week with their group manager and Mr Davies to discuss the Capital Works project, and at no point have they been advised that this is the situation. Now, the point of having those weekly meetings is so that they can be informed. So I'm concerned they're sitting here today, coming in cold into this meeting with not knowing that. I'm equally concerned that I'm hearing a range of projects, and what's ticking in my head is how much staff time is now required to deliver, perhaps the Ms Harrison's list there, how much staff time that was allocated for this financial year hasn't been used, now needs to cascade into next financial year. And I'd say that again in relation to all these projects, they cascade in, and we sat here at the long-term plan process. We did Mr Doherty sat down to say, hang on, you're telling the council you can deliver $60 million worth of capital. That is not possible. Let's have a reality check. Let's get this in play. And 8.3 million now today, I'm being told, is now going to cascade from this current, the previous financial year into the current financial year. And I'm trying to work out how in the world that is all going to get delivered. How in the world is there going to be, if you've sized this right at 40 million, so you came and told us you could do 40, and you sized that based on allocation of staff time and other things, and now we're getting basically telling us that we've got 8.3 million. That's a significant percentage off, given we'd already made a reduction down from 60 million. We'd already dropped it down to bring it to something realistic after being told at one of these meetings 12 months previously that 60 million could be delivered. I'm at a loss here to understand the project management controls that are across this area that are ensuring that we deliver our contract with the community. I really am, and whether it's a need for a brief adjournment so we can get that list to have a look at it, because I'm concerned that some of this might be sitting in areas, say, in the Planning and Regulatory Committee where I've got responsibilities as the chair. They may be sitting in Councillor Noonan's area where she's the Community Services Chair and she's got responsibilities, but I'm particularly concerned where these may be infrastructure projects that other people are relying on being delivered, where we have critical path activities that are key to the long-term plan. Infrastructure projects was one of our key priorities. And it puts at risk for me the ability to deliver the long-term plan that has only been signed off weeks ago. So to come in today and find that in such a very short space of time, the organisation's view of itself in terms of the capital can change so dramatically gives me real concern, particularly when I'm hearing that the chair and the deputy chair have had no disclosure of this until this report came up. And it's not a question in that, there's a statement to go, I'm really perturbed and I'm not quite sure, because it's one thing reporting it, but the next thing I want to know is how are you going to fix it, staff?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to make a comment as well about the situation, but prior to that, I'm conscious that Councillor Walker is wanting to say something, but also the Chief Executive asked if he could speak. Do you want to do that at this point or after Councillor Walker's spoken? After Councillor. Okay, so Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Through you, I try and attend everything that's going so that I can do my job as a councillor in a better way. So now I come to a point where I need some advice as to how I can get an assurance that the Works and Infrastructure Committee actually receives sufficient timely information on critical projects so there are no surprises. How do we determine that? Because I thought that that would be a process long ago put in place. But as Councillor Rutledge has said, that we became aware of this issue almost by default. I'm not a member of this committee. And to find the detail, after asking at our weekly meetings, how's it all going? I made a comment a few weeks ago, how's Neil Park going? I was told, oh, we had a hiccup, but it's under control. Today I find, in fact, that the hiccup was very serious, that there's foundations for some gear obviously is not right, and something is having to be sent back out of town. Now, to my way of thinking, that's pretty serious stuff. And if I'm going to have some sort of oversight from a governance point of view and be confident that the work is properly being managed, it makes it pretty darn difficult for me.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Delberg, I'll do that before I speak.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm picking up the, first I've got to say thanks to the CEO when he first came in. Best information I got was, we were talking 60 mil. You've only ever done 40 mil, if my recollection is correct. Why don't you target 40 as a stretch, more likely getting around 35? Was my I thought, gee, that's a light bulb moment. now we can actually get onto it, because you do lose time when you're restructuring 60 to 40 each year, because someone's got to worry about it. Just think that's lost time. My concern right now is if we're now going to take this, the very effective word was bow wave, I quite like that, the old bow wave on our boat, 8 mil into the 40 mil of next year. The question would be, how long do we need to start changing plans for next year if we need to make some adjustments? I'm thinking now the government's going forward. Also, we've got to solve where we are now. How quick do we need to get onto that so next year isn't pushed into a situation we can't get to?
Thank you. Certainly the last couple of speakers, the Mayor and Councillor Walker, have said a number of things that I wanted to. I mean, one of the things that surprises me, and a fundamental requirement of governance, is you don't get too many surprises of governance. An expectation, as this report is being drawn up, that things have moved from 3.5 to 8.3 in 1 month. I would have expected there would have been a preparation for a lot of detailed explanation, because you could have anticipated surely that there was going to be a lot of question around that. For that to happen at the end of the financial year, in the circumstances where this committee, at the end of every financial year that I've been associated with it, has raised concerns about the gap in capital expectation and capital delivery, I would have thought would also have reinforced that. Like Councillor Dahlberg, I was really encouraged by the approach taken earlier in the year to reset expectations around capital. And I am really saddened to find we're in the same place as we always have been in terms of carrying an amount forward. And I think it really has to be a target that the carried forwards are appropriate only for the multi-year projects, and the others, and we need to set the plans according to that, because the impact on our ability now to deliver for next year is immediately compromised just a couple of weeks into the financial year, and that's going to have to be looked at yet again in the same way as the exercise that took place. When was it? In late last year in December, where we reset it. But also the fact that I still don't know what actually happened between May and June that was a total surprise to everybody that caused $1 million delay. Was it just the footings and foundations of I'm talking about Neil Park here? I assume those things can happen. Would that expectation was that $1 million would have been expended in that month? But then the other question comes: why is it kept a secret? And isn't a sort of open disclosure? And that worries me at a systemic level, at an approach level. And I know it's one that I know the Chief Executive certainly doesn't want to be where he is in this particular issue, but it's a serious one, and I know that Pat will, that the Chief Executive will take it as such. But these are quite big questions, because this is actually, for me, it's a failure of a solution, because a solution was put in place and that too has failed. And that for me takes it into a slightly different dimension, and that's my concern. So having loaded that lot horribly for you, Chief Executive, please feel free to comment.
And I don't disagree with anything you've said, and the staff who were in the room, they told me what the carryover was, will probably reflect that I said more and louder. This concerns me greatly, and if you look on page, I think it's 45, there's that chart that shows the CapEx expenditure. And the purple line is the revised projection, heading just on $40 million. The red line is our CapEx, and you can see to the end of May that we were sitting at roughly $3 million below the line. And normally, in every organisation I've been a part of, in that last month, there is a lot of money gets spent, and you see a sort of an upward curve. And so I personally had thought we're doing okay, there'll be an upward curve and we'll get pretty close to that 40 million. And Councillor Delberg is right, that the stretch target was 40, but we averaged 35. So that's one of the questions I've asked is how on earth did we not manage to achieve an upward curve when for 9 years in Kapiti I worked very hard to stop that upward curve because it was so steep that what on earth happened here? And I'm well aware that we can't carry $8 million forward to 48 because even if we hit our stretch target of 40, we'll still miss by another 8. So I have asked for the information on the projects, on their implications, which ones need to be carried forward, which ones don't. That carried forward is not a right, it's a privilege. And there needs to be a clear change in expectations with those who manage projects that as Councillor Rutledge has said, this is a fail. And actually, to my mind, this is of more concern to me than Green Meadows. I mean, this is a bigger picture fail than Green Meadows. And so the lack of information is my fault because I insisted on that number being given to this committee, that we could not come to this committee without that number being made public. But in terms of what the plan is going forward, I don't have it yet. You've seen what I have seen. In terms of making sure works and infrastructure is better informed, as I've talked about, from September there will be quarterly reports where every major project that works in infrastructure is looking after will have its own page. And one of the things there will be a projection to completion. Probably not in the first quarter because that can be a bit tough, but from the second quarter onwards there would be a projection to completion. And I expect open, transparent, blunt conversations about what that is. I firmly believe in the principle of no surprises. And we'll be talking about three things: quality, it has to be paramount, cost and time. But we need to get better than this. From a projection in January of $40 million to miss by this much is not good. And we need to look at how often, well, clearly we're going to revisit those projections quarterly and we're going to have to get better at this. I just don't think there's been enough attention paid to it. So all I can say is I'm sorry and we will do better.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Madam Mayor.
To the Chief Executive, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you here are being open, transparent and really taking on board the mood of the governance team that's sitting at this table. I would say as Mayor that view will be shared by all of Council. It affects the commitment that we've made as elected members on behalf of this community. It is also a conversation that we are having cold in a public meeting, and that is how we have them. That's what the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee is here to do. Is its focus is very much on the transparent analysis of what is going on. But I am extremely disappointed on behalf of the chairs of the committees because some of them are not here. That they have been put in this situation, and there is going to have to be a solution to this. I'm not sure what it is going to be yet. Pat, you're going to have to really work on something here. I guess I'm now at the point of having been here multiple times, having commitments given to me, having those commitments not followed through on, that continuing with a business as usual approach certainly isn't there. We've been here and had that conversation, as Mr. Peters has said, on multiple years, saying no, there must be a systems change. This is systemic, and we have had commitments that change has been made and the delivery will be done. It is. I do think there is. I don't think we can wait 6 weeks actually to find out the detail of these projects. And as Mr. Peters said, given what was in this report, I would have expected that to be here today. I absolutely would have. Because there are projects here that other projects will be relying on. I know there are projects, if I can look through some of these ones here on that table at the bottom of page 45 and go, that detail needed to be here today. I'm now going to have to send another email, which I've already sent one off today to all the chairs. I'm now going to have to send another one off to say you're going to have to be sitting down with your group managers and running through this very, very quickly and getting a report up to me in terms of your assessment as chairs as to where we're going to go next. I mean, I'm at the point now, I have to say, and it is a very open conversation to say, we really have to consider how are we going to deliver our capital projects. What is our system going to be for delivering them? Because I think it is absolutely realistic that we set a reasonable, considered budget, that we spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of time as governors sitting in this, working with managers, business unit managers, as a council as a whole, going through setting priorities. There are projects that don't proceed because we determine things a higher priority, make a commitment to the community, and then when they don't get delivered, it does feel like, as Councillor Walker said, how can he deliver his commitment to the community to be a good governor of the city if we don't have quality advice coming to us? It leaves us in an untenable position. And I'm sorry to express my displeasure this openly and this directly, but actually it is the final straw.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your comments, Chief Executive. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it is concerning. For some years now we've been pushing. Let's get this sorted. When will we get the annual report so that we get the final figures? Because I'm still not confident that what I've got today is accurate. Because, for instance, we're told 8.3 million is the forecast for the underspend, but if I look at the graph, it's more like 20 million. The graph on page 45. We've got a forecast of expenditure going to 40 million. We've got the budget at over 60 million at the end of June, so that's confusing me. Where did you get? Guess what I'm talking about?
So if I can answer that, Mr. Chair. So when we did the long-term plan, we acknowledged that we were not going to hit the green line or the blue, or actually it's the blue line. So that effectively $22 million was moved into the LTP. So that money is covered. The real problem for us is the gap between the red line, and so the purple line became what we expected to spend to be able to start the LTP afresh. And we've missed by $8 million. And that's the piece. It's not in the LTP for next year. And what do we do about that? And that's the scale of the problem. The 8.3 million.
That's that piece,
yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Delberg.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I sort of, because I've only been here 2 years now, so the first year, I've got to say, the information we were getting wasn't that great for me in the report standards. I'd like to say right now we are moving in the right direction. And I appreciate this is sitting on the table, but the real test of this thing here and our structure is someone going to own up to the problem? Because, you know, there's always going to be a challenge, there's always going to be something not going right. The Secretary of Good Team, I've always thought, is owning up to it and sorting it out. Because the challenge now is for the chairs and also ourselves is to now revise how do you take 5 million or 8 million bucks out of the next year's planning, because it was kind of hard work just getting it down last time. So you're now going to have to shift stuff in, pull stuff out. That's going to be a lot of downtime that wasn't preferred not to happen. So where we are right now, all I'd just like to see is that I would have expected myself to have a summary where I am, even large numbers. This is what we're missing, this is where I am. So at least I feel better informed if someone asks me out there who I'm representing. And then our team around the table here to help the staff get to where we need to be. Because this has already happened, you know. To me, it's about moving to the next bit and then the work we've put in already over the last year, and the staff improvements we're looking for, so we can get to doing 35, 40 mil year after year effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Dahlberg. As the Chief Executive has said, he's shared the problem with us. He does not yet have the solution. The solution is required. I'm confident the Chief Executive will develop that and share it in a way that chairs of committees are very promptly informed of what their issue is, and that there will be a mechanism to look at managing that carryover. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, Pat, but if there's anything further you want to say.
No, I agree with you, Mr. Chair, but in terms of owning up, that's me. That's the perk of the job, I'm afraid. So as I said, I'm sorry, we will fix it.
Thank you. Mr. Murray.
Thank you. One on the same tack, but we are some 6 weeks beyond the balance date, which is a hard date. And just for a wee bit of context, you may not be able to answer it, but how much of the 8.3 has been delivered over the last 6 weeks? Because it's the timing difference you're really talking about. Has it been resolved anyway, to a large degree? Simply by the timing difference moving through July, August.
Through the chair, I don't know what that figure would be, but for example, we were spending about $500,000 a month on Neil Park. So Neil Park the construction work is continuing to move ahead. We're still within budget, and that sort of gives an indication of how quickly we're spending that money. So the upward curve that the Chief Executive referred to, I think, will occur, but it's probably occurring now rather than before the end of the financial year when we needed it to.
Yeah, that was my point. We're here now today, which is some past this date. Some of this might have self-corrected, so I suppose a bit of a sense of that might be helpful when whatever comes next. If I may change tact, 4.2 first dot point, I see we've got a $2.1 million surplus on the transfer for the landfill assets. How's that income? Ms Hughes?
I would hesitate to answer that right now. Obviously, we will be pulling all that together in the annual report, and there will be a lot of description and a lot of explanation around that. That was a very complicated transaction. I would be happy to talk to you about that offline.
Okay.
Once I have it all in front of me.
It may be reclassified then?
There's always that possibility. I don't think so at this stage.
Yes, let's do that. Thank you. We have moved on to other topics, and I think it is timely that we do that, to take questions. I think the message has been delivered and heard regarding the issues around the CapEx. Moving then on to other questions relating to the corporate report. Are there any other items, any other questions relating to that?
If I may, through the chair, just an observation, page 42. The graph was kind of interesting to me. It's the debt over 12 months. Presumably that's external debt, but I think it's worth noting that as at May 17, our debt levels as at May 18 are almost identical, which wouldn't be sort of what I was expecting if you asked me what things we're going to do from May 17 to May 18. So I found that quite interesting. And again, just to point out that we are within our borrowing compliance, so they're all green dots, or favourable, if you may. But yeah, I found that an intriguing sort of like line on the graph, that we're pretty much equal in our debt levels to what we were 12 months ago.
Did you want to comment on that, Mr. Murray, or just an observation? Just an observation.
I do have a couple of small corrections to make to the report. If you turn to page 47, 5.2.1 is a spelling error in formally. It should be formerly, not formally. And down at 5.3, that should read, there were no councillor safe work observations reported for this period. That was just an error in my interpretation of a report from an SLT safe work observation. 5.3.1, there were no councillor safe work observations reported for this period is what it should read.
With those clarifications there, I'll open up questions. Questions for Mr. Chair?
I just had a couple of questions arising from the report. 5.2.2, the security incidents and the measures taken to protect against them at the Stoke Library, are they continuing?
Through the chair, yes, there is a range of measures in place. As needed, they're constantly being reviewed and updated. I believe the contract for the youth workers has been extended, or there has been a contract written for them to take them through to the end of the year with some coverage, and they've trialled removing the security guard coverage while that is in place, an assessment of the risks in the current situation there, but it's so the security, we've got it in place that the security can be reinstated if needed at any stage.
I asked the question because going past there very often throughout the colder winter months, the groups of youths have not been there, and I've seen the security officer standing around, going into the library. I just wonder, is there an actual need when, particularly during the school holidays when there was no one there after the school times? It just seemed to me right through that period, that through the cold winter, this was managing a risk which I didn't see as existing. So that's my comment on that. And the other question I have is page 55. Through April, May, looks like there's been an increase in sickness in the organisation. Is that right? Well, it's not as bad as it was in 2017. Is that the way I read it?
That's correct. That's just a measure of sick leave days taken. It gives us a very rough guide. It doesn't give us a very good picture about what's going on at all. The external factors contribute hugely to this, the amount of illness in the community and things. We've got it there because hopefully it will identify if something is going particularly wrong and we can do something about it. But to me, that curve is within seasonal trends. There's also the fact that the data generally changes for the previous month. I always look back a couple of months, and the previous month it often changes because it hasn't been reported by the time I get the data, but only slightly usually.
What percentage of staff avail themselves of the free inoculation, flu inoculation?
I believe it was around 40-something% this year, which is consistent with other councils. Some were as low as 20 and the highest were up in the 50s from the information I got.
And is about the same as the average district health ward. Further questions? Mr. Hughes? Councillor Delberg?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I note on page 57, CT upgrade on the Turner Library. Can we have a sort of timeline? I'm kind of thinking, deterrence is probably a good thing, rather than wait till someone does something. So does that take a month, or what's the timeline on that to get something like that happen?
That's a very good question that I'm meeting with Libraries Management tomorrow, and that's one of the actions that will be discussed. There has been pricing already from a supplier on that, on a solution to that. So, yeah, but I don't have the answer regarding the timeline, and maybe someone else may be able to answer that better, but I'm not sure. No.
Thank you for that answer. I wonder if it's appropriate, once we've got an idea, to just let members of this committee know on that. If there's a question that can't be answered by a member, it's handy to be able to answer that as soon as the information's available.
Probably my question is, do these type of things take 6 months or do they take one? That's kind of what I'm thinking, you know.
Thank you, and I know Councillor Rutledge had his hand up, but I had a point that was very related to that. I'd actually noted that one as well, Councillor Dahlberg, but also noted on page 60 and the last dot point of page 59. Again, I think this format's working quite well, Malcolm, for health and safety, but it's the same issue really to some extent as we were talking about with Mr. Vaughan earlier, is some timeliness around it, and where we've got something like an implementation of a drug and alcohol policy or something like a procedure around river practices. I'm just conscious of staff and governors' responsibilities in the area of health and safety, that you not only have to know the thing is happening, you have to be reasonably confident they're happening in a timely fashion. So it might be useful sometimes if something like that can just have a little paragraph or footnote saying expected Q3 or whatever it might be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I note on page 52 that a contractor received an injury from a stingray strike. Are you seeing a significant uptick in stingray-related attacks, and what's your strategy to mitigate those?
Through the chair, I don't have any other data on stingray attacks. The research I did after this incident was that stingray attacks, although painful, are not necessarily particularly harmful unless it pierces a vital organ, as happened in the well-known case. Yeah, but I don't have any data on an upsurge in stingray attacks. I believe my understanding is that it can be seasonal, particularly warm weather attracts them into shallow water. But I don't have any information on that.
So with global warming, we're expecting to see more of these sort of things happening, are we?
Through the chair, once again, not my area of expertise. I wouldn't like to speculate on that.
Chief Executive.
It is one that I have asked Malcolm to follow up on. You know, do we need to put divers in the water, is the first question, and if we do, are they taking every precaution? Because if this one had been someone falling from a ladder on dry land, then we would have said no, use a cherry picker. So what do we do? Obviously diving is a more hazardous occupation, but it's still one of our contractors, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can, that we are following industry best practice. And that's my first question, is there some way we can do this inspection without putting a body in the water?
Any further questions? Councillor Barker?
Yes, sorry, I did have one further question. It's relative to section 5.1.2. When I read it, and I guess this may be a situation where I don't want to invade any privacy, but where did these incidents where members of the public were injured take place? I've read through the rest of the papers and couldn't find the detail.
Yeah, through the chair, I don't provide that level of detail. That level of detail goes in my monthly reports to SLT, but in order to keep these reports brief, I haven't put that level of detail in here. However, I can answer that question on those, I think. One of them was a child at Founders Park actually kicking the glass of the door, and the door glass broke. Oh, is there? Oh, sorry, yeah. I'll go to page 52 and read it instead of trying to remember it all.
Oh, missed it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You're probably distracted by the stingray, Councillor Barker.
I see it there, thanks very much.
Does that answer that question satisfactorily?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Newland. Thank you for coming. Are there any other questions relating to this report, Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Malcolm, thanks for a really good report. I find this extremely useful to give governance oversight in terms of the work that's going on in the health and safety area. But I am just noting in terms of the due diligence activities, do you think we're a bit behind in terms of our elected member work safe observations? And do you think we probably need to get some booked in the diary?
Through the chair, yeah, that's, I did look at the targets yesterday. I think it's one per quarter is what the goal is in the governance charter or the strategic plan for elected members. Maybe we need to look at better ways of achieving those and look at the systems of why that's not working, why it's not happening.
Well, Mr Chair, I think we need to note that there's work on action for us here because we have got responsibilities as officers under the Act. So we've set some target measurements for doing those, for getting out and about, and clearly we're a bit behind. So whoever has responsibility in terms of scheduling those needs to make sure that we do something about that within the next month, and we just have to find some mechanisms for doing it. I don't want us to be behind in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Rickett.
Thank you. Just looking at page 54, 1.5B, vehicle over speed events. No, just so I've got that right, that is our vehicles.
That's council vehicles. All council vehicles, as far as I know, have the readers that monitor those and give us that data.
So I guess look at this with being the chair of the Regional Transport Committee and going, any exceedances are pretty concerning, that we should be exemplary in this space, and that, this is not just ticking over the speed limit, this is more than 10 k's an hour over. So what are we doing as an organisation to I guess get on top of this, and I would expect that we would have a very much a zero tolerance approach to this sort of stuff.
Through the chair, I can answer that question. The reports also give us data about who the drivers were in each case, and also gives us exactly where the speeding events occurred. So we can look at that data, and we've identified areas that cause particular problems. There's places where the speed limit changes from 100k to 50k, and it's quite a short space. So we do education around that, and I think that has contributed to the fact that we are continually improving in this area. We're getting the number down. I would suspect if you looked at any large organisation with a fleet, I don't know what the data is, but I would expect there would be a rate that is around what ours is, if not higher. 10 k's is a block. It is, the law does say the speed limits need to be followed. However, it is very easy to accidentally get over that speed limit without focusing on it very carefully, and sometimes driving with the flow of the traffic and focusing on other risks can actually be more important than focusing entirely on the speedo. So we look at the reports and where these incidents are occurring. If we see in a residential area a continual range of people exceeding 50 k's, then we follow those up with the individuals. But where it's just a couple of times, where it's a change, or what we call our road design speed traps, we treat those differently, or we look at those. Any driver that has more than 10 overspeed events in a single month, that report goes to their manager and gets looked at and discussed with them.
Sorry, more than 10 in a single month. That's the trigger for starting to be concerned about a behaviour that is, I don't know if generous is the right word, but that means you're basically speeding every time you get in a vehicle.
Through the chair, I can clarify. So sometimes you'll see it might have been a period of only 1 or 2 minutes where the person was speeding, but it will have beep, 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 pinged, sent multiple messages back, and that's there, it's recorded as a single event, even if it's in a short stretch of road. So, yeah, we had one example that was a particularly bad month, and one of the worst ones was a vehicle, and it was actually a heavy vehicle, the emergency response vehicle, driving down the 100k zone, but of course the speed limit for them is 90k. They were doing 102 all the way down there, and so not necessarily an excessive speed, though definitely outside the law, and they got spoken to about it, but it showed up, it made a significant difference to the data for the month for the whole organisation, the fact that this distance of 7 or 8 kilometres, they'd been doing 102 kilometres.
So just following on from that, if I can just build on what Councillor Rick just said, I noted that one of those points I made on, I think it was on page 60, one of the actions, the treatments planned was driver training. Is that in this space, Mr. Hughes, or is there other aspects of driver training that that's addressing?
Mr. Chairman, it is in that space along with other spaces, and definitely it would be prioritised for anyone who had an ongoing issue with being unable to stay within the thresholds that we've set for speed. And that's written into policy, into our safe use of vehicle policy, that training is to be used where people are deemed to be unusing. Another tool, the Chief Executive can withdraw access to the use of vehicles from individuals if required as well. So these things are set in the safe use of vehicle policy.
Knowing of our responsibility in relation to health and safety matters, I wonder if I could suggest that Councillor Rutledge's comments relating to the frequency and extent of that are reviewed by the appropriate group to see if that tolerance level and margin is still acceptable. Okay, if there's anything, thank you, Councillor Barker. Thank you, Councillor Delberg. Any further discussion? If not, put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. And final report.
I move that the draft governance disclosure policy report be received and that be recommended to Council for approval.
Thank you for that proposal. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Delberg. I will still welcome Ms. Birch to the table. It's nice to have you here. Thank you for this. We have a report that's already been moved and seconded. Presume there's no changes that you want to suggest to the report at this point?
No, there are no changes.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this? I think it's fulfilled a requirement. This, to my knowledge, is the only outstanding item on this committee's status report. So it completes that. Councillor Delberg.
Yeah, just bring up, thanks, Mr. Chair. Was to cover the elected members. We had initially one that covered our staff, and there was a discussion probably 6 months ago or something about that. This may need to end up in standing orders or end up being referenced somewhere. I think that's how it came about.
No, this will be a standalone policy. It does not need to be referenced within standing orders.
Yes, sir.